In the technocratic dystopia of Neo-Babylon, neurosurgeon Alexis created a revolutionary technology. A virtual experience allowing users to safely relive the moment of another's death, designed for psychological healing and self-understanding. But billionaire Lysander seized the invention, turning it into a perverse elite entertainment, as the hormones released in the body transformed the experience into a true narcotic. Starting with recordings of real deaths, it soon escalated to commissioned murders for the ultra-rich, making death a luxurious spectacle. Horrified by the corruption of his creation, Alexis joins forces with hacker Eve and rebels to dismantle Lysander's empire. Navigating a world captivated by spectacle, Alexis faces a daunting question. Can the elite and the masses be persuaded to abandon the pleasure of murder as entertainment, or is humanity's moral compass broken? The recycled air in Alexis Thorne's apartment tasted perpetually of ozone and disappointment. It was a small, hermetically sealed box in a mid-level sector block of Neo-Babylon, a place of muted grays and beige synthetics, deliberately devoid of personal touches. A stark contrast to the shimmering spires that pierced the smog-choked sky kilometers above, the spires where Lysander lived, where his corporation, the Ivory Tower, reigned. Alexis moved through the space with the quiet, measured steps of someone trying to make as little impact as possible on the world. He showered, letting the tepid water trace the sharp angles of his ribs, the scars of past stresses etched onto his lean frame. He dressed in the standard issue, collarless tunic and trousers that marked him as a resident of Sector 7G, functional, anonymous, forgettable. Breakfast was a nutrient paste pouch, swallowed quickly while his eyes, dark and haunted, scanned the minimalist data slate on the counter. Not for news, not for entertainment, but for the faint, ever-present hum of the city's data stream. He was a ghost here, existing on the periphery of the vibrant, terrifying life he had inadvertently helped create. Neo-Babylon throbbed with a singular obsession, the Thanatos experience, or TX. Even in the relatively subdued mid-levels, flickering holographic projections bloomed on building facades and personal devices. Dazzling, stylized advertisements showcased fragments of intense, beautiful moments, soaring over canyons, dancing in zero gravity, feeling the rush of a winning bet, and always the tagline rendered in elegant, pulsing script: live fully, die gloriously, experience Thanatos. The TX was everywhere. The central squares had massive, public experience walls where crowds gathered, plugged in wirelessly, their faces slack with simulated rapture. The private experience halls in the upper sectors were legendary dens of sensory indulgence, whispered about even down here. Lysander had taken Alexis's invention, a tool for therapeutic exploration of mortality, designed to help people confront loss and fear, and twisted it into the ultimate narcotic spectacle. By stimulating specific hormonal releases linked to moments of peak fear, adrenaline, or acceptance, the TX didn't just show you a death, it felt like you were dying. And for the jaded elite of Neo-Babylon, that simulated rush, the ultimate taboo conquered, was intoxicating. Alexis pushed the data slate away, the paste sudden ashes in his mouth. Every glimpse of the TX was a fresh wound, a reminder of his failure, his naive belief that such a powerful technology could be contained, used only for good. He had wanted to help people find peace, to offer a unique perspective on life by understanding its end. Lysander saw only a market, a craving for sensation to be exploited. He spent his days in forced quietude. Reading old, physical books salvaged from recycling centers, tending a tiny, illegal micro-garden on his windowsill, the only splash of green in his metallic world, or performing minor, untraceable maintenance on aging neural nets for small, cash payments. Anything to avoid the gnawing silence that amplified the echoes of his past. The jolt came just before twilight, as the manufactured sun disks began their slow, artificial descent. His data slate, which he kept on a strictly firewalled anonymous network, pinged, an incoming message heavily encrypted from an unknown source. His training, his paranoia, screamed **danger**. But something else, a desperate, dormant hope, flickered. He initiated the decryption sequence in his most secure partition. It took several tense minutes. The air in the small apartment felt thick, charged. The only sound was the soft whir of the slate's internal processor. When the lock finally broke, the message unfolded. It wasn't a text file or a simple data dump. It was a small, embedded executable designed to run a specific sequence. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, his fingers hovering over the execute command. His stomach churned. What if it was a trap? What if Lysander had found him? But the source was untraceable, rooted through dozens of defunct servers and ghost nodes. It felt different. He initiated the executable. The slate's display went black for a moment, then resolved into a complex overlay. Code scrolled rapidly on one side, transaction logs, timestamps, metadata strings too specific, too granular to be faked. On the other side, a video fragment began to play. It wasn't a polished TX experience. It was raw, shaky, clearly recorded from an external source, perhaps a surveillance feed or a compromised drone camera, synchronized with the metadata logs. The scene was brief, brutal. A small, sterile room. A figure, bound, terrified. Another figure, unseen but inferred, administering something, adjusting restraints. Then, the sudden, overwhelming spike in bioreadouts displayed alongside the video, adrenaline, cortisol, norepinephrine levels rocketing, mirroring the data Alexis knew intimately from his own research logs. The logs scrolling beside it showed large sums of untraceable credits transferring, tied explicitly to a specific timestamp. A timestamp that corresponded exactly with a recently released, highly publicized new Thanatos experience, titled The Last Breath of the Condemned, advertised as a uniquely intense, natural experience of suffocation. The figure on the screen convulsed, eyes wide with terror, the simulation of suffocation replaced by horrifying reality. The fragment cut off. Alexis stared at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. The sterile apartment spun. This wasn't salvaged footage of an accident or a historical event. This was cold, calculated, real. The transaction logs, the synchronized biodata, the pristine metadata matching new widely available TX. It wasn't just proof. It was a ledger of murder. Lysander wasn't using *death. He was creating it, commissioning it. For entertainment, nausea surged. Alexis stumbled back from the counter, hitting the bland wall with a gasp. His hands trembled violently. No, this couldn't be real. This couldn't be what his invention had become. He had known Lysander was corrupting it, exploiting recorded deaths, yes. But this was another level of depravity he hadn't imagined. His chest tightened, air refusing to enter his lungs. The familiar, terrifying clench of a panic attack seized him. He slid down the wall, knees hitting the cold floor, struggling to breathe, the image of the terrified figure on the screen burned behind his eyes. They're killing people, deliberately, so the rich could feel the thrill of dying. He stayed there for what felt like an eternity, gasping, trembling, the sterile apartment a cage of his own making and his own horror. The guilt, a constant dull ache, flared into an unbearable inferno. This was his fault. He had built the machine. He had given Lysander the keys. But beneath the crushing weight of despair, something else began to stir. A hot, sharp shard of pure, incandescent rage. They were killing people. His technology was being used to facilitate murder as a luxury product. The initial panic began to recede, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. This couldn't stand. He had to do something. He got shakily to his feet, wiping the cold sweat from his forehead. He had the proof, undeniable proof. He had to show someone. The authorities, his old colleagues at the university, the corporate ethics board, surely they couldn't ignore this. Scene 2, the data slate felt heavy, a dangerous burden, as Alexis left his apartment. He wore a nondescript hooded jacket, pulling the hood low. The mid-level corridors were busy with the evening rush, drones delivering packages, automated sweepers cleaning the synthetic walkways, residents returning from shifts in the lower sectors, or corporate offices in the levels above. He kept his head down, eyes scanning for surveillance nodes or unusual patterns. Every public screen still shimmered with TX ads, a cruel mockery of his purpose. He couldn't risk using his own limited firewalled connections for this. He needed public access points, untraceable nodes, the kind Lysander's systems monitored but couldn't always perfectly track back to a source, especially for high-level security alerts. His first stop was a public data terminal near a transit hub. It was busy, people rushing past, plugging in briefly to check schedules or send quick messages. Alexis found an unoccupied terminal, activated it with a generic public access code, and began navigating the labyrinthine digital infrastructure of Neo-Babylon. He tried the automated authorities first. The Central Bureau of Citizen Security was the official law enforcement body, mostly AI-driven and notoriously unresponsive, unless a crime fit neatly into pre-programmed parameters or involved damage to corporate property. He accessed their secure submission portal, carefully uploaded the encrypted data packet, attaching a high-priority flag and a brief, coded summary referencing severe violation of Biocode 7b alpha regarding unauthorized terminal experience sourcing. The response was instantaneous, automated, and utterly dismissive. A generic notification popped up, submission received, currently ranked Tier 8 priority. Estimated review time, 4872 standard hours. Cases involving alleged corporate malfeasance or proprietary technology disputes are subject to mandatory internal review protocols. Tier 8. It might as well have been Tier 800. It would be buried, ignored, or rerouted directly to Lysander's internal security. Frustration simmered. He logged out, moving quickly away from the terminal, feeling exposed. Next, he sought out a semi-private communication booth, the kind designed for more sensitive calls, usually booked for legal consultations or medical privacy. He found one in a quieter concourse, paid the small fee, and entered, the sound-dampening field activating with a soft hum. He tried his old colleagues at the university. Dr. Alexis Thorne, his mentor and friend, the one person he thought might listen. He dialed Eris's secure comm code. The call connected, ringing briefly, then cut out. A pre-recorded message played. The recipient's communication node is currently under restricted access protocols. Please leave a message or contact their department administrator. Restricted access. That wasn't normal for Eris. Had Lysander already silenced him? He tried another, a researcher he'd collaborated with on the neurological mapping aspect of the TX. The call didn't even connect. A cold, synthesized voice informed him, recipient identifier is not active on the Neo-Babylon grid. Not active. Had they been disappeared, or simply scrubbed from the public directories? He felt a prickle of fear crawl up his spine. Lysander's reach was longer, his control tighter, than Alexis had allowed himself to believe. Desperate, he decided on a long shot, the Ivory Tower's internal ethics hotline. He knew it was likely a facade, but he had to try. He accessed their public-facing portal, navigated to the Integrity and Compliance section, and found the submission form. He uploaded the data again, this time using Lysander's official corporate identifier in the summary, demanding an immediate investigation into commissioned illegal sourcing for Thanatos Experience product lines, verifiable with attached data. The response was swifter this time, almost immediate. Not an automated dismissal, but a personalized, though clearly templated message that appeared on the screen. It wasn't from an AI. It was from the Corporate Security Department. Attention, Citizen Alexis Thorne. Your recent communication regarding alleged sourcing irregularities has been reviewed. Please be advised that the Ivory Tower maintains the highest standards of ethical conduct and legal compliance in all its operations. Your claims appear to be based on misinterpreted or fabricated data. We understand that former employees may sometimes harbor grievances or misunderstand proprietary information. Your communication has been logged, and we consider this matter closed. Further attempts to disseminate unverified or malicious data regarding corporate operations may result in legal action. Have a productive day. The message vanished, replaced by a standard corporate logo. Alexis stared at the blank screen, his jaw clenched tight. Not only were they dismissing it, they knew it was him. They had flagged his communications instantly. They weren't going to investigate, they were threatening him. He leaned back against the padded wall of the booth, the sound-dampening field suddenly feeling less like privacy and more like containment. The air felt thin again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was the suffocating reality of Lysander's power. He controlled the authorities, the information flow, perhaps even the people Alexis had once called friends. The polished facade of the ivory tower had offered no solace, only cold, impenetrable walls. Every official channel, every supposed safeguard against corporate overreach, had slammed shut in his face with chilling efficiency. The data slate in his hand, proof of Lysander Vance's monstrous corruption of his life's work, felt less like a source of leverage and more like a branded target on his chest. He was utterly alone, adrift in a sea of indifference, the horrifying truth gnawing at him. The quiet despair that had been his companion for so long was no longer an option. The raw, burning clarity of seeing what Lysander had done had stripped away that luxury. He couldn't fight this within the sterile, monitored confines of the mid-levels or the glittering spires. The system was asterisk Lysander. To survive, to act, to even begin to undo the unimaginable damage, he had to step entirely outside of it. He had to descend, not just physically, but into the unseen currents, the forgotten alleys, the places where the rigid lines of Lysander's control blurred and broke. A different path lay before him now, shrouded in shadow, fraught with unknown risks. It was a path that would force him to confront the ghosts of his own past and lead him deep into the underbelly of Neo-Babylon, where the rules were written not by corporate decree, but in whispers and desperation. He took a breath, the recycled air suddenly tasting of dust and decay, and turned his back on the sterile light. He hadn't stayed in the sterile quiet of his apartment after Lysander's chilling confirmation. Instead, the gnawing truth had driven him out into the pre-dawn chill of Neo-Babylon's deserted mid-level corridors, the secure data slate now a burning weight in his pocket. Hours later, as the city's artificial sun climbed, he found himself standing on a windswept observation platform, staring up at the impossibly sleek tower that housed his former laboratory, a gleaming monument to everything Lysander Vance had stolen and corrupted. This was the crucible of his past, the birthplace of his greatest triumph and deepest failure, now a tomb for his buried idealism. The air here was thinner, cleaner than the dense, recycled air of the lower sectors, a perpetual reminder of the vertical segregation that defined Neo-Babylon. From this vantage point, the building that once held his dreams was just one facet in the immense, crystalline structures that clawed towards the perpetually overcast sky. But for Alexis, it was a specific ache, a phantom limb of a life severed brutally years ago. He closed his eyes, and the sterile, efficient exterior dissolved, replaced by the vibrant, buzzing memory of what it had been. The hum was different back then, not the low, oppressive thrum of a city running on borrowed time, but the focused, almost joyful whine of cutting-edge equipment being pushed to its limits. The lab, though clinically clean, wasn't sterile. It was alive with the faint scent of ozone, warm circuitry, and the underlying aroma of lukewarm nutrient paste that had been forgotten on desks for hours. Diagrams sprawled across whiteboards, equations snaked across transparent screens, and the central prototype, a smooth, ergonomic pod currently offline, gleamed under the focused track lighting. Young Alexis Thorne, barely 30, ran a hand over the pod's cool surface, his face alight with an exhaustion born of obsession, not despair. Beside him, a holographic display shimmered, showing a complex network of neural pathways and biofeedback loops. "It's almost there, Dr. Elias," he said, turning to a holographic projection of a kind-faced older woman. "Subject 7, a recent widow, we put her through a simulated memory of her husband's last good day. Not his death, mind you, but a vivid, happy memory. The biofeedback from the system, the physiological markers of emotional recall, they're incredibly strong. The next phase is introducing, a controlled narrative focused on closure." Dr. Elias smiled gently. "And the therapeutic angle, Alexis? The ability to process grief, to find understanding in traumatic events? That's the core," Alexis insisted, his voice quickening with passion. "Imagine a veteran, haunted by a split-second decision under fire. The TX isn't about reliving the horror gratuitously. It's about isolating that moment, understanding the physiological and environmental triggers, processing the asterisk feelings associated with it in a safe, controlled environment. Or a family member dealing with a sudden loss, experiencing a guided narrative that simulates the final moments, allowing for a sense of presence, a virtual goodbye, calibrated to release endogenous opioids naturally, easing the sharpest edge of the pain and facilitating acceptance. It's empathy made tangible, Dr. Elias. A tool for healing the mind by engaging the body's own chemistry. His gaze drifted to the empty pod, a profound hope in his eyes. We're building bridges across the chasm of trauma, offering solace where medicine and therapy currently fall short. A chime sounded, announcing a visitor. The lab door hissed open, revealing not Dr. Elias in person, but a man who seemed to radiate polished confidence like an aura. Lysander Vance. Younger then, certainly, but the predatory gleam was already in his eyes, just better hidden beneath a veneer of smooth charm. Dr. Thorne, Lysander said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, cool. Lysander Vance, my firm has been following your work with immense interest. Truly groundbreaking. Alexis, slightly flustered by the unannounced visit from a known tech mogul, shook the hand. Mr. Vance, we weren't expecting you. Opportunity rarely waits for an appointment, Lysander chuckled, a sound like tumbling coins. He gestured around the lab. Fascinating. The Thanatos experience, you call it. A little morbid, perhaps, but certainly memorable. He didn't seem to notice Alexis flinch slightly at the casual use of the name. My analysts see tremendous potential here, beyond just therapy. Think of the applications, Dr. Thorne: education, training, even entertainment. Imagine experiencing history or the thrill of extreme sports from perfect safety. Alexis's brow furrowed. The primary focus is therapeutic, Mr. Vance, on processing difficult emotional and physiological states for healing and understanding. Lysander waved a dismissive hand, though the smile never left his face. Of course, noble goals, but to achieve them on a scale that matters, we need infrastructure. Funding. My company can provide that. A dedicated research division, resources you can only dream of currently. We can take this Thanatos experience and make it a global phenomenon. Bring your healing to millions. But to do that, we need to think bigger, wider market appeal. The initial influx of funding was like a tidal wave, sweeping away the frustrations of grant applications and budget limitations. The lab expanded, more researchers were hired, equipment materialized as if by magic. Lysander was a whirlwind, charismatic, decisive, seemingly empowering Alexis while subtly, irrevocably shifting the narrative. Processing difficult states is a bit dry, Dr. Thorne, Lysander said during one strategy meeting, projected onto a massive wall screen from his opulent office. Let's talk about exploration. The exploration of human sensation, the limits of consciousness. Intense sensory input. That's marketing gold. Alexis pushed back, his voice tight. But the safety protocols are designed specifically for therapeutic use. Simulating trauma requires careful psychological screening, debriefing. It's not just intense input, it's potentially re-traumatizing if handled improperly. Lysander's smile tightened just a fraction. And that's why we have your brilliant safety architecture, Dr. Thorne. It makes any asterisk experience safe. The user feels the full impact, the fear, the physiological response. But the moment brain activity indicates genuine distress beyond the controlled parameters, the system pulls back. It's foolproof. Think of the adrenaline junkies, the thrill seekers. They crave authentic experience. We can give them the ultimate thrill, the simulation of facing death itself, without any actual risk. The word death hung in the air, cold and alien to the lab's original purpose. Alexis felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. But simulating death, Alexis started, his voice barely a whisper. That wasn't the intent, it's morbid. It exploits a primal fear, not helps heal it. Lysander leaned closer to his camera, his voice dropping conspiratorially. Dr. Thorne, fear is the oldest currency, and overcoming it, even in simulation, is the most potent high. We're not just offering therapy anymore, we're offering transcendence. The ultimate spectacle. The word echoed in Alexis's mind, a jarring note in the symphony of healing he'd envisioned. He tried to argue, to remind Lysander of the ethical guidelines, the potential for psychological harm, the core purpose. But each objection was met with polite indifference, a reference to market research, focus group results, or simply Lysander pulling rank. "With respect, Dr. Thorne," Lysander said one afternoon, his tone final. "You are the architect of the system's mechanics asterisk. I am the architect of its asterisk destiny asterisk. Your genius built the machine. My vision will make it unstoppable. The board agrees. We're moving forward with Phase 3, peak experiences, focusing on the most visceral, most intense human moments. And frankly, Dr. Thorne, your hesitations are slowing progress." His access to core development teams became restricted. His input was relegated to technical fine-tuning of the safety protocols. Ironically, the very things Lysander intended to push to their absolute limits. The lab's atmosphere changed. The idealistic buzz was replaced by a cold, driven efficiency. The scent of ozone mingled with the metallic tang of ruthlessness. The final straw came with a revised contract. It redefined his role to a senior technical consultant, stripping him of any creative control or ethical oversight. His name was buried deep in the credits, while Lysander's corporation was plastered everywhere. When Alexis refused to sign, citing a fundamental breach of their original understanding and his ethical code, Lysander didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Then you are no longer necessary," Lysander had stated flatly, projected on the screen, his face a mask of disinterest. "The technology is ours. The patents are secure. Your access will be revoked by end of day. Consider yourself retired. We'll handle the destiny from here." He was escorted out of the lab he had poured his life into, the humming silence of the abandoned prototype echoing the emptiness in his chest. He didn't look back. The memory receded, leaving Alexis standing on the windswept platform, the cold metal railing biting into his gloved hands. The building before him was the same structure from his memory, but utterly transformed. His old lab, once nestled within a larger corporate complex, was now its own distinct annex, sheathed in new, reflective glass panels that seemed to mirror the cold, impersonal sky. The ivory tower's ubiquitous, stylized V logo was emblazoned near the top, a triumphant mark of ownership. He could see through some of the lower windows into what had been the lobby area. It was no longer a functional, slightly cluttered entry, but a minimalist space dominated by large, stark white panels featuring sleek, almost predatory-looking graphics, clearly promotional material for the Thanatos experience. He couldn't make out the words from this distance, but he knew the language. Transcending limits, ultimate sensation, experience the void. The words that had replaced his own, healing, understanding, solace. His stomach twisted. This wasn't just a building. It was a desecration. His creation, meant to be a sanctuary for the wounded mind, had been refashioned into a temple for morbid curiosity and commercial exploitation. The sterile elegance screamed of the billions Lysander had made, not from healing, but from packaging and selling simulated death. The data slate in his pocket felt heavier now, the proof of commissioned murder inside it a direct, horrifying consequence of this architectural and ethical ruin. For years, guilt had been a heavy shroud, muffling his outrage with layers of what-ifs and if-onlys. He had been naive, yes, trusting, certainly, but seeing the physical manifestation of the complete, unadulterated corruption of his work stripped away the last vestiges of self-recrimination. It wasn't his failure of judgment that was the primary crime. It was Lysander's deliberate, calculated perversion of a tool for good into an engine of depravity. Lysander hadn't just stolen his invention, he had stolen its soul. A cold, hard certainty settled deep within Alexis. He had tried the system. He had tried appealing to logic, to ethics, to the corporate structure, even to the law through official channels. All had failed, slamming doors in his face, reinforcing Lysander's impenetrable power. The memory of the threatening response from corporate security in Chapter 1, coupled with the visual proof of this corrupted monument, solidified his understanding. Lysander operated above and beyond the system. Fighting him within its confines was impossible. Standing there, watching the polished surfaces of the building reflect the indifferent city, Alexis felt the last flicker of his old, hopeful self die. In its place rose something colder, sharper. Guilt transformed into a searing, focused anger. Despair hardened into a brittle, unwavering resolve. He looked away from the building, scanning the sprawling, vertical city before him. Somewhere down there, in the grimy underlevels or the overlooked midsectors, were people who understood this kind of fight. People who operated outside the pristine, controlled world of Lysander's spires. People who fought shadows with shadows, systems with subversion. Turning his back on the gleaming spire, Alexis let the biting wind whip away the last vestiges of his despair. The system he had trusted, the city built on lies, offered no justice, only oblivion. He had looked for redemption in the light, among the towers that scraped the heavens, but found only shadows. Now, with a grim resolve hardening his jaw, he knew the path forward lay not in the structures he had once revered, but in the forgotten, unseen layers beneath the city's dazzling facade. Finding allies outside the controlled strata would mean venturing into the dark currents, seeking out those who operated in the city's blind spots. It would mean trusting the untrustworthy, dealing with those who knew the underbelly because they were the underbelly. He didn't know where the search would lead him or what dangers lurked in the depths, but the conventional was dead. It was time to embrace the ruin and descend, seeking the tools to build anew in the places Lysander's light never touched, among the secrets he thought were buried forever. The biting wind felt like a clean slate as Alexis turned his back on the architectural lie of the spire. Redemption wouldn't be found in the gleaming towers, but in the forgotten layers below, among those who lived outside the system's cruel light. Back in the sterile quiet of his mid-level apartment, the daunting task loomed. How to find allies in the city's hidden depths when he'd only known its polished surfaces. Just as he began sifting through old, untraceable hardware, a flicker of unexpected data appeared on his screen, a burst of pure signal, coded with a phrase that resonated with a truth only he, the architect of the Thanatos experience, would recognize. The data slate Alexis had scavenged from a recycling depot, stripped, wiped, and loaded with open-source encryption he trusted more than anything state or corporate sanctioned, pulsed with a silent alert. It wasn't connected to the city's omnipresent net. It was a ghost frequency, a burst transmitted directly via an archaic, point-to-point laser link pointed precisely at his window. Highly illegal, easily intercepted if you knew what to look for, and utterly anonymous unless you were the intended recipient. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the screen. Fear, a familiar companion, tightened his chest. This was precisely the kind of communication Lysander's security would be scanning for. A trap, a probe. Yet, after the stone wall of official channels and the chilling directness of the corporate threat, this felt like the only door not slammed in his face. His desperation, a cold, hard stone in his gut, began to outweigh the caution. He activated the decryption routine he'd built years ago, designed to unravel the most complex corporate espionage. The process took mere seconds, displaying a short, stark message. Meeting request protocol //auth/echo, LOC, UNDRLEVLS sector gamma #7A time, Sun Nader +3 CYCLES, reference, Project Chimera subroutine delta's negation sequence. Response, coded burst confirm ordinai. Alexis read the message once, then a second time, his mind reeling. The location was a hash, a unique digital fingerprint pointing to a specific, likely obscured physical spot in the labyrinthine underlevels. The time was standard solar notation, easily calculated. But it was the reference that seized his attention, yanking him out of his cautious fear and into stunned recognition. Project Chimera subroutine delta's negation sequence. It was a fragment of code, a specific algorithm he had designed in the earliest days of the TX, back when it was Project Chimera, long before Lysander had even coined the term Thanatos experience. It was the failsafe, the negation sequence, intended to instantly terminate the simulation if bioreadouts showed any asterisk sign of genuine distress beyond controlled parameters. He had scrapped it when Lysander demanded unfiltered peak experiences, claiming it interfered with the hormonal cascade. He had thought it was lost forever, purged from all official records. No one outside of his own sealed data archives should know that specific, technical detail. This wasn't a random probe. This wasn't Lysander trying to lure him out. They wouldn't use a detail that proved the sender had deep, illegal access to his original work. This was someone who knew Project Chimera intimately, someone who knew him, and someone who operated entirely outside the grid Lysander controlled. His mind raced through possibilities. Former colleagues? Unlikely. They were either co-opted or silenced. Rival corporations? Possibly, but why use such a specific, personal reference? The implications settled over him. This came from someone who had potentially compromised Lysander's most secure archives, someone who understood the fundamental nature of his creation, and someone willing to reach out with extraordinary risk. It had to be the unconventional allies he had sought. The desperation surged, overpowering the fear. This was his chance. Trap or not, he had to take it. He configured the untraceable device to send a simple, coded burst. Not a standard confirm, but a sequence of data packets that, if interpreted correctly, would acknowledge the message and indicate his acceptance of the meeting terms using a subtle, non-random pattern he'd embedded in the data slate's unique hardware fingerprint. It was the digital equivalent of a nod. He sent the burst. It was instantaneous, a single flash of light from the laser emitter on his window ledge, gone before it registered on the visible spectrum. Then, silence. The data slate went dark, inert once more. The waiting began. He spent the remaining cycles before the designated time preparing. He shed the respectable, anonymous clothing of the mid-levels for darker, more durable fabric. He packed a small bag with essentials, a multi-tool, a filtered breathing mask, a high-density data crystal loaded with emergency protocols, and a small, untraceable stunner he'd kept hidden for years. He felt a strange sense of purpose settling over him, cold and sharp. He was stepping off the path he'd walked for years, descending into the unknown. Getting to the underlevels was not a simple matter of taking an elevator down. The city's vertical structure was a rigid class system made manifest. The gleaming upper sectors were serviced by private, high-speed conduits. The mid-levels relied on a network of aging, relatively clean public transit hubs and automated service shafts. The underlevels, however, were deliberately cut off, accessible only through decaying infrastructure, forgotten service tunnels, and unofficial access points known only to those who lived or worked, illegally, in the depths. Alexis left his apartment building through a service entrance, merging into the anonymous flow of shift workers. He took a public transit line down 3 sectors, watching the environment change through the reinforced windows. The polished chrome gave way to painted steel, the ambient music faded, replaced by the hum of antiquated machinery. The air grew heavier, losing the recycled crispness of the upper levels. At the third-level transfer station, he bypassed the main public corridors, which were still monitored by automated security drones, and slipped into a designated maintenance access route. It was a risk. These areas were theoretically restricted, but years of neglect meant the digital locks were easily bypassed with simple overrides, and the automated patrols were few and far between, more concerned with large cargo movements than solitary trespassers. The descent became a sensory experience. He navigated narrow, echoing stairwells coated in a fine layer of dust and grime. The air became thick, carrying the damp scent of stagnant water and something metallic, industrial. Lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The smooth composite walls of the upper sectors were replaced by raw, exposed concrete and rust-streaked metal plating. Pipes groaned overhead, carrying unseen fluids through the city's colossal frame. He followed increasingly dilapidated corridors, guided by outdated service maps he'd accessed and purged from public terminals. The automated security checkpoints, frequent and imposing in the upper levels, became less common here, often bypassed by simple physical detours through vented shafts or unsecured side passages. The system, designed for control above, seemed merely to contain the chaos below. As he went deeper, the sounds changed. The controlled hum of air circulation was replaced by the distant clang of tools, the rumble of heavy machinery, and the murmur of voices, not the polite, modulated tones of the mid-levels, but harsher, sometimes shouted exchanges. The silence between sounds felt heavier, expectant. He began to see signs of habitation outside the formal structure. Makeshift dwellings were built into alcoves, constructed from salvaged materials, corrugated plastic sheeting, scrap metal, reinforced cardboard. There were faded graffiti tags, symbols he didn't recognize. He saw figures lurking in the shadows, their faces obscured, their eyes tracking him with wary suspicion. He was an outsider, clearly not one of them, his movements too deliberate, his clothes too clean. He felt increasingly vulnerable, exposed. The sterile world he knew, with its predictable patterns and controlled environments, felt light years away. Here, survival felt more immediate, more primal. He kept his gaze forward, walking with purpose, trying not to betray his unease. Every dripping pipe, every scuttling rodent, every whispered sound amplified his isolation. Hours passed in this descent. He bypassed broken escalators, climbed down service ladders into vast, disused chambers that smelled of ozone and decay, and squeezed through narrow passages where the city's foundations seemed to weep condensation. The sense of scale shifted. The towering height of Neo-Babylon above was replaced by the crushing weight of layers upon layers built overhead. Finally, guided by the subtle markers embedded in the location hash, a sequence of specific pipe configurations, a unique structural support column marked with a faint, almost invisible symbol, he reached his destination sector. It was a vast, cavernous space, once likely a transit hub or industrial plant, now repurposed. The air was thick with the smell of cooking fires and human habitation, mixed with the ever-present damp and metallic tang. The light source was sporadic, emergency lighting strips, crackling energy lanterns, the glow of small, contained fires. He moved cautiously through the sector, the hash guiding him towards a specific corner of the immense space. The makeshift dwellings grew denser, more complex. Children played games he didn't understand in the dusty aisles between structures. Older faces watched him pass, their expressions unreadable mixtures of suspicion and weary resignation. He felt the weight of their gaze, the quiet assessment. This was their world, and he was an intruder. He reached a section where the structures seemed more deliberately built, less temporary. Behind a facade constructed from thick metal plating, illuminated by a single, shielded lantern, was an entrance. It was just a gap in the plating, reinforced with heavy struts. A figure stood near it, partially obscured by shadow, but clearly watching his approach. Kale, perhaps. He paused, taking a deep breath of the heavy, recycled air. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. The figure near the entrance stepped aside as Alexis approached, revealing a broad-shouldered, silent individual whose eyes scanned him with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. It was Kale, just as the plan had hinted. Kale didn't speak, didn't nod, simply gestured with his head towards the gap in the plating. The message was clear: enter. Alexis ducked through the opening, finding himself in a surprisingly reinforced corridor that led into a larger hidden space. The meeting point wasn't a sprawling cavern like the sector outside, but a contained room carved out of the old infrastructure and layered with soundproofing and shielding. It felt secure, isolated from the life and noise of the underlevels outside, yet intrinsically asterisk it. The room was utilitarian. Consoles glowed with cryptic data streams, mismatched chairs and tables were scattered around, and cables snaked across the floor, connecting various pieces of salvaged and jury-rigged technology. At a central console sat a figure hunched over the glowing screens, fingers flying across a keyboard. This had to be Eve. As Alexis entered, she looked up, her eyes, sharp and intelligent, pinning him in place. She was younger than he expected, maybe late 20s, with close-cropped hair and a face that seemed to hold both fierce determination and bone-deep weariness. Kale entered behind Alexis, closing the heavy plating and leaning against it, effectively blocking the exit and continuing his silent assessment. Eve's voice was low, modulated, and distinctly lacking in warmth. "Thorne, didn't think you'd show. Most people from your levels prefer their despair packaged and delivered, not found in the dirt." Her cynicism hit him like a physical blow. You sent the message. Who else knows about Project Chimera subroutine Delta's negation sequence outside of Lysander's deepest data vaults and you? She retorted, a wry twist to her lips. And who else has a reason to talk to the good doctor who built Lysander's golden cage? He swallowed, ignoring her jab. How? How did you know about that? About me? Information is power, Thorne, Eve said, turning back to her console but keeping an eye on him via a monitor feed. Lysander thinks he controls it, but he's sloppy. Leaves digital footprints even when he's trying to erase them. The archive holds a lot of ghosts. The archive? Our little repository of everything Lysander wants forgotten. Cale's voice rumbled from behind him, the first words Alexis had heard from him. It was deep, gravelly, and laced with suspicion. We're the echoes, Thorne. We amplify the voices he silences. Eve picked up the thread. Lysander Vance didn't just steal your invention, Doctor. He weaponized it against us. The Thanatos experience isn't just elite entertainment. It's an opiate. A social control mechanism disguised as pleasure. They plug in upstairs, mainline death, and forget about the squalor they stand on. She gestured vaguely upwards. Alexis felt a fresh wave of nausea. He had seen the transaction logs, the bio-readouts, confirming the addiction, but hearing it described with such raw human context made it sickeningly real. I saw evidence of commissioned murders. Is that true? Eve stopped typing, her eyes meeting his directly now. The cynicism was gone, replaced by a cold, hard anger. True, it's the foundation of his latest iteration. The last breath of the condemned. You saw raw data, Thorne. We see the empty chairs, the missing faces. She swiveled her console screen towards him. It wasn't a data log this time, but a series of faces. A young woman smiling nervously at a camera, an older man with kind eyes, a child holding a brightly colored toy. Beneath each face was a name, a date, and a chilling single line. Last recorded TX subject, name. These weren't found dead in the street, Doctor, Eve said, her voice low and sharp. These were people from the underlevels. Targeted. Disappeared. Sometimes they find the bodies later, sometimes not. Always, their death coincides with a new, highly anticipated experience release in the spire. She brought up another file. This one was a chaotic, grainy video feed from a hidden camera. It showed a dark, cramped room. Two figures struggled briefly before one was subdued. The captors were masked, but their movements were precise, efficient. Then, chillingly, one of them attached a familiar device, a scaled-down, portable version of the TX biomonitors he had designed, to the victim. The video cut out. Salvaged from a raid on a secure transport, Eve explained, her voice flat. They were bringing him to a recording site. Lysander doesn't just buy death recordings anymore, Doctor. He manufactures them. Commissioned, bespoke murder for his elite clientele. Live or near-live recordings of people being hunted, captured, killed. Experienced from the victim's perspective, amplified by the hormonal feedback your technology enables. Alexis stared at the screen, at the faces, at the chilling video. The clinical data he'd seen had been horrifying, but this was visceral. These were people. Their lives, turned into entertainment, their final moments a drug for the jaded rich. The guilt he had carried for so long mutated, burning now with a fierce, protective rage. He had unleashed this monster upon the world. He's built an economy of death down here, Eve continued, her voice gaining intensity. Preying on the desperate. Bounties on specific psychological profiles for bespoke experiences. Creating artificial famines or driving people to ruin just to make them targets. It's not just entertainment, Thorne. It's genocide by spectacle. Cale shifted behind him, and Alexis sensed the silent weight of the reality Eve was describing, embodied in the man who lived it daily. You built it, Eve said, her gaze unwavering. You know its secrets, its weaknesses. Lysander controls the network, the hardware, the spectacle, but you understand the ghost in the machine, the original intent, the core vulnerabilities. She leaned back slightly, the glow from the consoles reflecting in her eyes. We can fight him, we can expose him. But we need someone who knows the beast from the inside out. The question hung in the air, heavy as the recycled air of the underlevels, bearing the weight of shattered lives and unspoken promises. Alexis looked at the faces, the desperation and the fierce hope, and knew there was no turning back, no retreating to his quiet isolation. His past wasn't just a burden, it was a weapon they needed. The ghosts of Project Chimera called him not to mourn, but to action. He felt the shift, a tectonic plate grinding beneath his feet, the scientist giving way to the soldier, the haunted recluse choosing the fight. "Yes," he said, his voice low but steady in the echoing space. "I'll join you. What do we do first?" A flicker of relief, quickly masked by grim determination, crossed Cale's face. Eve offered a rare, knowing smile. The silent scrutiny eased, replaced by a shared sense of purpose that resonated deeper than any data stream. Stepping across that threshold meant leaving behind the remnants of his old life, descending further into a hidden world where the lines between code and reality blurred, and survival hinged on forgotten knowledge and desperate innovation. He had built the system they sought to break. Now, he would help them find the cracks. The journey down was over, but the true descent into the heart of the rebellion had just begun, a path shrouded in secrecy, leading towards a confrontation he was uniquely equipped and terrifyingly unprepared to face. "Yes," Alexis had said, his voice steady, and the sound seemed to activate something beyond just acceptance. Cale nodded, a silent acknowledgement that spoke volumes, then moved towards a section of wall that slid aside, revealing a passage darker and less frequented than the one they'd just used. This wasn't merely a physical descent. It was stepping behind the curtain of Lysander's carefully constructed reality, into the true underbelly where the echoes built their network on resilience and the ghosts of forgotten knowledge, a place where Alexis Thorne's unique burden could finally become their shared weapon. The passage led downwards, a rough-hewn tunnel lined with repurposed metal sheets, salvaged pipes snaking along the ceiling, dripping condensation in rhythmic plinks. The air grew cooler, carrying faint, complex scents, ozone, damp earth, old oil. It was a stark contrast to the stale, filtered air of Neo-Babylon above. After a few minutes of walking in near silence, the tunnel opened into a vast, echoing cavern. This was the archive. It wasn't a single room, but a sprawling complex carved out of abandoned infrastructure. Girders the size of ancient trees crisscrossed overhead, supporting levels long forgotten. The floor was a patchwork of worn concrete and packed earth. In the center, beneath rigged lighting that flickered with scavenged power, lay the heart of their operation. Desks fashioned from metal plating were scattered around, stacked with salvaged monitors, data slates, and cables. Makeshift shelving units groaned under the weight of physical archives, old books, microfiche reels, data crystals from forgotten eras. The hum of servers, carefully maintained and hidden behind reinforced plating, vibrated subtly through the floor. People moved through the space with quiet purpose, splicing wires, tapping on consoles, poring over documents. They weren't the polished citizens Alexis knew from the upper sectors or the wary, guarded faces from the immediate underlevels he'd just passed through. These were different, focused, determined, bearing the subtle marks of hardship, but also an inner fire. They glanced at Alexis, the newcomer, with a mixture of curiosity and assessment, but returned swiftly to their tasks. Cale remained a silent sentinel, his presence a solid anchor. Eve stepped forward, a small smile touching her lips, a flash of warmth in the stark setting. "Welcome, Dr. Thorne," she said, her voice clear despite the cavern's acoustics. "To the archive. This is where we gather, process, and act. It's extensive," Alexis murmured, genuinely impressed by the sheer scale and ingenuity of the setup. He'd expected something smaller, more hidden. This was hidden by being vast and overlooked. "We use what Neo-Babylon discards," Eve explained, gesturing around. "Old network trunks, decommissioned power lines, forgotten levels. Lysander builds on top, we build within and below." She led him towards a central cluster of workstations. "Formally, then," she said, her expression serious. "You said yes. You understand what that means? You are committing yourself to a path outside the law, outside the system you know. There is no turning back, no protection from above. You are one of us now." Alexis met her gaze, then Cale's. He looked around at the faces, some young, some old, united by a common cause forged in the shadows. The abstract horror of Lysander's actions, first encountered on his data slate, then made brutally real by Eve's evidence in the other room, solidified into a concrete resolve. His past self, the guilt-ridden recluse, felt miles away. "I understand," he said, his voice gaining strength. "My creation is being used to commit atrocities. Silence and inaction are complicity. I want to dismantle Lysander's empire. I want to help." Kale gave another subtle nod, a sign of acceptance. Some of the nearby Echo's members offered small, acknowledging gestures. "Good," Eve said. "We are the Echoes because we aim to make the voices of the forgotten and silenced heard again. We gather information, disrupt Lysander's operations where we can, provide aid to those in the underlevels, and, when necessary, offer resistance." She didn't sugarcoat the last part. It was dangerous work. "Our resources are limited, our reach is constrained, but our knowledge is growing." She gestured to the packed shelves. "This is the archive," she repeated. "Physical records we've salvaged or stolen, encrypted data caches, intelligence reports from our network of contacts throughout the city. And this," she led him to the secure servers, humming behind reinforced walls, "is our digital heart. Our connection to the city's pulse, carefully insulated from Lysander's surveillance." "Lysander's control is comprehensive," Alexis noted, thinking of the frictionless nature of data flow in the upper city. "How do you evade it?" "Old protocols, forgotten side channels, exploiting the sheer complexity of Neo-Babylon's legacy infrastructure," Eve explained, a spark of technical enthusiasm in her eyes. "And constant vigilance. It's a perpetual game of hide-and-seek, played at the speed of light." Now, it was Alexis's turn to offer his contribution. "My value, I believe, lies in my intimate knowledge of the Thanatos experience system," he said. "Its core architecture, the code base, the intended security protocols, and perhaps the flaws Lysander might not even know exist." He felt a strange mix of pride and shame discussing the system he had built with such different intentions. He began to elaborate, describing the modular nature of the biomonitors, the data compression algorithms for live neural feed, the architecture of the observer protocols designed for safe disconnection. He spoke of the layering of the security, the initial external shell, the internal redundancies, the specific handshake protocols required for the neural link. He recounted design decisions, compromises made under pressure from Lysander's early influence, and the ethical considerations that had been systematically stripped away. As he spoke, some of the Echo's members, particularly those working on data slates nearby, looked up, listening intently. A couple furrowed their brows, clearly unfamiliar with the intricate technical details. One older man, with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much, leaned against a support column, a skeptical look on his face. Alexis noticed the skepticism, the quiet doubt in some eyes, the question, "What can this man from the spires possibly know about our fight?" Eve, however, leaned closer, her eyes shining with focused interest. She asked precise questions, interrupting to clarify acronyms, confirm design methodologies, connecting his descriptions to data fragments her network had already captured. "The ghost maintenance subroutine?" she asked sharply at one point. "Was that ever fully decommissioned, or just firewalled off the primary network?" Alexis paused, accessing a deep memory. "It was intended for emergency remote diagnostics without user interaction," he said. "It was never fully removed, only buried under layers of new code and access restrictions. Lysander wanted complete control, no backdoors, not even intended ones. He probably thought it was redundant or a potential liability to him." "Bingo," Eve breathed, a thrill running through her voice. The skeptical faces started to shift, a ripple of recognition passing through the technical members. This liability could be their opportunity. "He might have built over it," Alexis continued, feeling a surge of validation as his knowledge, dormant and painful for so long, found purpose. But core functionalities, the handshake for the ghost interface, they would have had to remain, however deeply nested, for system stability or perhaps out of sheer oversight during rapid iteration. The skepticism in some eyes began to fade, replaced by dawning understanding and respect. This man knew the heart of the beast in a way none of them ever could. He wasn't just a refugee from the spires, he was carrying the blueprint of their enemy's inner sanctum in his mind. Alexis felt a knot of tension he hadn't realized was there begin to loosen. He was finally using his knowledge not for profit or even therapy, but for justice. Hours bled into days. The cavern of the archive became Alexis's world. He ate when others offered him nutrient bars or rehydrated meals, slept briefly on a cot in a quiet corner when exhaustion finally claimed him, but mostly he worked. He and Eve were inseparable, sequestered in a section of the archive dedicated to their most sensitive digital operations. The space was a web of illuminated screens showing streams of data, network maps, and lines of code. Alexis sat hunched over a salvaged console, a data slate glowing beside him, displaying complex diagrams he drew from memory, the logical flow of the TX, the architecture of the Spire servers, the routing protocols for the sensory data. Eve worked opposite him, her fingers flying across her own console, constantly cross-referencing his information with data streams pulled from Lysander's network periphery. Okay, the primary user data stream is heavily encrypted, obviously, Eve said, tapping a sequence. Brute force is impossible with our resources. Standard intrusion detection systems are top tier. The encryption key is generated dynamically with each session, Alexis confirmed, rubbing his temples, tied to the user's neural signature and a seed value from the server. Designed specifically to prevent playback manipulation or data siphoning by unauthorized parties. A bitter irony given Lysander's use. Right, so we don't go after the active stream, Eve mused, her gaze fixed on a scrolling log. What about the asterisk storage? Where do the raw experience files live before processing? The ones Lysander commissioned. Alexis recalled the early design phases. Raw data was buffered locally on the server cluster before being parsed and encoded for the final user experience. There was a temporary holding area, a series of buffer nodes. Less critical security on those, initially. It was assumed the main security perimeter would handle external threats. Eve's fingers danced, parsing Lysander's current architecture based on limited external probes. He seems to have integrated those buffer nodes deeper, but they still exist. They have asterisk too. It's fundamental to processing the raw feed. A map of Lysander's internal network, gleaned from countless hours of Eve's reconnaissance, glowed on a large screen. Nodes and connections pulsed like a nervous system. See, here, this cluster, labeled Buffer Array 7B. It's behind several layers, but the data flow suggests it handles the preprocessed raw feeds from the source. The source, Alexis repeated, the word chilling. He knew what the source was now. Any residual protocols on those buffer nodes? Eve asked, looking up at him, her eyes intense. Authentication methods? Could there be a legacy access point left active from the original design? Something tied to administrative access for calibration or diagnostics? Alexis closed his eyes, picturing the clean, sterile lab, the diagrams on the whiteboard. Calibration. The neural interface required precise calibration. There was a direct access port on the server nodes for that. It needed high-level clearance, of course, but it bypassed some of the external firewalls, accessing the internal buffer directly for real-time adjustment checks. Clearance structure? Eve prompted. Layered, Alexis said. Standard user, privileged user, admin, then creator, a failsafe layer. It required specific authentication. A sequence, a key phrase, tied to the original project ID. Project Chimera subroutine delta's negation sequence. He looked at Eve, remembering her coded message. That's what you used to find me. Eve nodded. It was an old, buried string in a decommissioned network log we stumbled upon. Didn't make sense until we cross-referenced it with the earliest public domain patents mentioning your original research. The phrase was unique. Could that creator access still function on the buffer nodes? Alexis asked, his heart rate quickening. Even if the main access points were resecured by Lysander? Eve turned back to her console, fingers flying. Data streams scrolled rapidly. Lysander's network security is like a fortress with layers upon layers. But sometimes, they forget to brick up the smallest window from the first phase of construction, especially if it's buried deep within the structure, deemed non-critical from the outside. The buffer nodes aren't the final presentation servers, they're processing. They might have missed it, or decided it was too complex to properly strip out without risking system instability. Minutes stretched, filled only by the tap of keys and the hum of machinery. Then, Eve let out a sharp exhale. There's a faint echo. A residual handshake protocol on buffer array 7B that responds to the creator layer authentication sequence. It's dormant, walled off, but it's still there. A ghost in the machine, just like you said. Alexis felt a surge of adrenaline. A vulnerability. A potential entry point into * the raw data processing nodes. Not the final TX experience, but the actual feed before it's packaged. Exactly, Eve confirmed, turning to face him fully, a grin spreading across her face. It's incredibly risky, incredibly complex. Accessing it would be like threading a needle through a hurricane of firewalls. Lysander's security would scream. But if we could, even for a moment, we might be able to access the raw files themselves. The evidence, or disrupt them, Alexis added, thinking tactically. Corrupt the feed, inject data, whatever we wanted, hypothetically, if we could maintain access for even a short period. They looked at each other, a shared spark of understanding and possibility passing between them. The technical hurdle was immense, but for the first time, Alexis felt he wasn't just staring at an insurmountable wall. He was pointing out a potential crack, and Eve had the tools to exploit it. Their collaboration, born of necessity and technical insight, had yielded a tangible path forward. They had found their opening. The planning room was a more austere section of the archive, a reinforced chamber with a large, salvaged display screen and a worn table. Kale was there, along with a few other key Echoes members. Lyra, a sharp-eyed woman who managed their intelligence network. Rix, a burly man responsible for security and logistics. And Lena, who oversaw their community aid efforts. Alexis and Eve stood before them, the large screen displaying the schematic of Lysander's network, the identified vulnerability on buffer array 7B highlighted in red. The Ghost Protocol, Eve explained, pointing to the glowing node. Dr. Thorne identified a legacy, creator-level access protocol buried deep within the buffer node cluster. It was intended for system calibration during original development, but was likely walled off, not removed, by Lysander's engineers. "And you can reach it?" Kale asked, his voice low and steady, cutting directly to the practical reality. "Potentially," Eve admitted, maintaining her professional demeanor. "It requires exploiting a series of timing windows and packet-routing anomalies we've identified in the system's background processes. It's the digital equivalent of navigating a collapsing building blindfolded. High risk of detection. If we're detected attempting access at that depth, Lysander will know someone is inside his core architecture. That wall will go up permanently, likely triggering a system-wide security lockdown and hunt. But if successful," Alexis added, stepping forward, his voice resonating with newfound purpose, "we could potentially access the raw data streams of commissioned experiences stored temporarily on those nodes. Unfiltered, direct evidence." Lyra, the intelligence expert, spoke up. "Evidence is powerful, but difficult to disseminate in a city where information is controlled. A data leak needs to be massive, undeniable, and reach people who can't ignore it, or people willing to act on it." Rix, the security lead, frowned. "Any intrusion, however brief, risks revealing our technical capabilities and drawing Lysander's full attention to the underlevels. We need to consider the safety of everyone here." "Agreed," Kale said, his gaze sweeping over the group. "Our first move must be calculated. Maximum impact, minimum exposure. We test the waters. What kind of action is feasible with a brief, high-risk access window?" They debated the options. A direct data leak of the raw experience files was too dangerous, too hard to control, and might be dismissed as elaborate fakery by the propaganda machine. A full system shutdown wasn't possible with their limited access and could cripple innocent city infrastructure. "What about disrupting the experience itself?" Lena suggested, thinking of the users. "If the elite are addicted to the sensation. What happens if that sensation is corrupted?" Eve's eyes lit up. "If we can access the buffer node, we aren't just seeing the data, we could potentially inject data into the stream before it's processed into the final, polished experience for the user. A very brief, targeted injection." "Inject what?" Kale asked. "Something discordant," Alexis proposed, a cold logic overriding his emotion. Something that breaks the illusion, not just static. Something that reminds the user of the source, the victim, a flicker of their reality inserted into the user's manufactured death. Lyra considered this. Target-specific, high-profile users, during a popular viewing time, it wouldn't be evidence we can leak, but it could sow doubt, make them question the purity of their spectacle. If enough elite users complain, even Lysander has to address it publicly, however subtly. It creates ripples. The idea gained traction. It was a precise, targeted strike. It leveraged the unique vulnerability they'd found, bypassed the need for data extraction, and aimed directly at the elite users, the core of Lysander's perverse market. It was a psychological attack wrapped in a technical one. The risk of detection is still high, Rix cautioned, but a brief data injection is less likely to trigger deep scan alarms than attempting to copy terabytes of raw data. Kale weighed the pros and cons. A targeted disruption. Not aiming to destroy, but to unsettle asterisk, to echo the truth back at those who consume lies. He nodded slowly. This is our first strike. Minimal resources, maximum potential to disrupt the spectacle. We target a specific, high-traffic viewing event. He looked at Eve and Alexis. Can you execute this? Gain access to the buffer node, inject the discordant data. What would it be, a visual flicker? An auditory anomaly? Something undeniably asterisk wrong inserted into the manufactured death. We would need time to prepare the injection package, Alexis said. Something short, impactful, derived from the victim data we've seen. A face, a sound, something jarring and undeniable from the reality Lysander tries to erase. We can create it, Eve confirmed, and we can plan the injection timing. We'd need precise synchronization with the live experience feed. The weight of their decisions settled, not as a burden, but as the solid foundation for the desperate gamble they were about to take. In the quiet heart of the archive, Alexis, Eve, Kale, and the others felt the shared resolve solidify. The ghost they hunted, Lysander Vance, was shielded by layers of technology and wealth, his power rooted not just in corporate control, but in the hidden depravity of the Thanatos experience itself. Their first strike wasn't just a technical maneuver. It was a probe into the very darkness he cultivated within the gleaming walls of the ivory tower. The hum of servers was the only sound now, a counterpoint to the storm brewing outside their hidden sanctuary. Soon, that hum would turn into a controlled roar as they unleashed their carefully planned disruption. But while the ripple they sought to create might be limited, the digital path they would open, even for a fleeting second, risked exposing them utterly. The true danger wasn't just the power of the man they challenged, but the chilling truth of what they might glimpse within his gilded cage, a truth that promised to haunt them far more profoundly than any echoes of the past. The quiet hum of the servers escalated into a focused thrum, a low roar contained within the stone walls of the archive as the moment arrived. In the heart of their technical hub, Eve's fingers flew across her consoles, preparing the intricate sequence drawn from Lysander's own twisted designs. By her side, Alexis provided constant, whispered guidance drawn from deep, haunted knowledge, while Kale's voice crackled over comms, coordinating the network's distributed pressure above ground. This was it, the first precarious tendril reaching into the beast's lair, a calculated strike that could either cripple or expose them utterly. Eve's terminal glowed with lines of rapidly scrolling code, a symphony of access protocols, data masks, and timing algorithms. The air in the technical hub crackled with focused tension. Across the cavern, other Echo's members were similarly poised, monitoring network traffic, ready to provide digital cover or react to security alerts. Kale, hunched over a separate comms station, issued sharp, low-voiced instructions. Above them in the mid-levels, teams were executing their synchronized tasks, minor network queries designed to create controlled noise, brief power fluctuations in isolated distribution points linked to Lysander Corp auxiliary systems. Pressure points confirmed, Eve, Kale's voice came, tight and clear through the filtered comms. Sector 7 Gamma, Level 42 grid stability dipping. Sector 11 Delta, data packet traffic spiking on auxiliary loop. Acknowledged, Eve replied, her eyes fixed on the primary access vector. Opening transient tunnel now. The window is narrow, maybe 30 seconds before automated countermeasures initiate hardlock. Alexis leaned closer, watching the fluctuating indicators on Eve's screen. Remember, target buffer node C. It's one of the few that handles raw stream data before the primary filtering matrix. Minimal processing, maximum impact if we can inject directly. His voice was low, steady, masking the tremor of adrenaline that coiled in his gut. This was it, the physical manifestation of his internal war. Node 8C targeted, Eve confirmed, her fingers dancing across the holographic keyboard. The complexity of the task was staggering. Lysander's security was layered, adaptive, and notoriously vicious. But Alexis knew its skeleton, its old, forgotten arteries. Injector sequence loaded. Data payload armed. The data payload wasn't a virus or a system-breaking hack. It was far more subtle, and perhaps far more psychologically devastating. A fraction of a second of raw, unprocessed sensor data pulled from one of the victim feeds the Echoes had acquired. The muffled sound of a final, ragged breath, the brief visual distortion of a failing light bulb in a concrete cell, the feeling of a cold, rough surface against skin captured by biosensors. Tiny, jarring fragments intended to pierce the sanitizing filters of the Thanatos experience and inject the brutal reality of its origin directly into the perception of the elite users. "Firing," Eve announced, her voice strained. For a beat, nothing changed on the main screens. Then, a distant alarm siren wailed, quickly cut off. On one of Kale's monitoring displays showing a live feed from a public data screen in Sector 11 Delta, the Lysander Corp advertisement briefly flickered, distorting into static before snapping back to its pristine state. A minor glitch, barely noticeable, but it was the physical manifestation of their intrusion. "System response is immediate," Kale reported, his voice sharper now. "Main network segmentation initiated. Tracer routines are active." "They're hunting." "Acknowledged," Eve said, her fingers already dismantling the transient connection, scrubbing logs, layering dummy traffic. "Injection confirmed, payload delivery, indeterminate. We hit the node, but confirmation it passed filters is impossible from here." "It wasn't meant to be loud," Alexis said, watching the screen. "It was meant to be a sliver, a doubt, if even one user felt something unnatural. We triggered their alarms," Kale concluded. "And we didn't get confirmation. But we did get *** reaction. That confirms they have vulnerabilities and that we can find them." "Minimal success," Eve said, leaning back, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. "Maximum risk initiated. They know * something happened." The technical humming of the archive felt heavier now, infused with the knowledge that their existence was no longer theoretical to the power above. They had poked the beast, and the beast was stirring. Minutes later, the immediate network alerts had subsided, replaced by the low, background hum of enhanced security protocols locking down Lysander's digital fortress. The tension in the technical hub hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. The first strike was complete. Now came the second, even riskier step planned by Alexis and Eve. "All right, Alexis," Eve said, turning back to her console, her expression grim. "Based on the system's reaction to the transient tunnel and your intel, I think I can route a passive observation link. It won't be stable, and it will be ridiculously high risk. Less than 30 seconds, maybe. Alarms will * trigger." "We need to see it," Alexis stated, his voice devoid of hesitation. The guilt that had once paralyzed him had been replaced by a cold, burning clarity. He needed to see the full extent of the corruption, to understand the scale of what his creation had become. Only then could he truly fight it. "All right," Eve acknowledged, nodding. Her fingers moved again, this time with a different kind of precision, exploiting the specific residue left by the system's reaction to their intrusion, combined with Alexis's deep knowledge of the legacy, creator, level access points, Project Chimera subroutine Delta's negation sequence, now likely walled off but still leaving ghost echoes in the architecture. On a large central monitor, a digital portal began to form, shimmering with the complex security signatures of the spire. It was like looking through a kaleidoscope of encryption, a fragile window into an impossible fortress. "Accessing," Eve murmured, her breath held. "This is raw data feed, unfiltered. direct from a high-level experience hall. Viewer discretion, probably recommended. Her attempt at levity fell flat in the charged air. The portal stabilized for a flickering moment, resolving into a visual feed. The room was opulent, breathtakingly so. Walls paneled in what looked like polished obsidian, inlaid with veins of glowing gold. Soft, ambient light spilled from hidden sources, illuminating plush seating arrangements. But the focus wasn't on the decor. It was on the people. Users reclined in ergonomically shaped chairs, sleek metallic interfaces covering their faces and heads, thick cables snaking down their backs, connecting them to powerful processing units. They were motionless, lost within the Thanatos experience. And their physiological readings, displayed in a separate data overlay that Eve's link was pulling, were terrifying. Heart rates spiked, adrenaline coursed, endorphin levels soared to drug-induced heights. These weren't people seeking psychological healing. They were addicts chasing a synthetic narcotic high derived from simulated death. The visual feed shifted, briefly giving a glimpse of the experience itself. Not the full horror, but fragments. A gray, concrete wall blurring past, the sudden rush of air, a flicker of terror in simulated eyes. It was fragmented, brutal, inhuman. Then, the feed snapped back to the users. One woman, her interface momentarily lifting slightly, revealed a face flushed and contorted, not with pain, but with intense, ecstatic pleasure. Another user let out a low moan that was undeniably sensual, a sound of pure, depraved gratification. They were experiencing simulated death as an orgasm, a ultimate thrill ride. The casual cruelty was sickening. These wealthy individuals, bathed in luxury, were consuming the final moments of murdered people as entertainment, as pleasure, as a drug. The contrast between their gilded surroundings and the raw, violent data fragments was a physical blow. Alexis felt a wave of nausea wash over him. This was worse than he had imagined. He had known Lysander was using the TX for profit and spectacle, but he hadn't fully grasped the depths of the elite's depravity, their complete dehumanization of the victims. He had designed a tool for empathy and understanding, and it had become this monstrous, perverse consumption of suffering. His hands clenched into fists, knuckles white. Eve, watching the same feed, let out a quiet, choked sound. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were wide with horror and disgust. These were the people who controlled their lives from their towers, who ordered murders in the underlevels, and they treated death like the most exquisite delicacy on their perverse menu. The fight against Lysander was no longer just about information or control. It was a visceral war against a rot that infected the very soul of Neo-Babylon's elite. They like it, Eve whispered, her voice trembling slightly. They enjoy it. It's not just power, it's this. It's worse than we knew, Alexis said, his voice rough. The abstract horror of commissioned death now had a face, dozens of faces, contorted in grotesque pleasure. Suddenly, the warning lights on Eve's console flared blood red. Alarms blared somewhere within the network, even through the firewall. They found the signature. Eve yelled, her fingers flying to sever the connection. Pulling out, now, the digital portal imploded, leaving only a blank monitor. The silence that fell in the technical hub after the simulated alarm faded was thick, heavy with the horror they had just witnessed. Alexis and Eve looked at each other, their shared disgust and outrage forging a new, unbreakable link between them. The glimpse had been brief, but it had seared itself onto their minds. High above the archive, in the crystalline spires of the ivory tower, Lysander Vance stood before a panoramic window overlooking the glittering, multi-tiered city below. He wasn't admiring the view. His attention was fixed on a data projection that floated in the air before him, displaying complex network analysis reports. Beside him stood his head of security, a burly, emotionless man named Thorne, no relation to Alexis, and a sophisticated AI assistant represented by a calm, synthesized voice. "Summarize again, Thorne," Lysander said, his voice smooth and calm, utterly lacking in heat, yet carrying an unnerving edge. "Sir," Thorne reported, his voice flat. "At 18:03 hours standard, our automated intrusion detection systems flagged a sophisticated, transient network anomaly. Source appears to originate from the lower mid-levels, with auxiliary pressure points detected across Sector 7 and Sector 11 auxiliary loops. The anomaly targeted a specific buffer node, 8C, within the Spire network. It was active for approximately 28 seconds before the system initiated hard segmentation. "And the nature of the anomaly?" Lysander asked, his gaze unflickering from the data overlay. The AI assistant responded this time, its voice clinical. "Analysis is ongoing. The anomaly injected a small, highly corrupted data packet. Initial scans indicate it contained fragmented sensor data, audio signatures, visual distortions, trace bioreadings, consistent with raw data streams pre-filtering. The signature is complex, almost archaic. It bypassed our outer layers by exploiting a residual handshake protocol within a deprecated creator-level access framework." Lysander finally turned, his eyes, the color of glacial ice, fixing on the projection. "Deprecated creator access. Negation sequence protocols?" "Affirmative, sir," the AI confirmed. "Specifically, a signature matching subroutine delta's negation sequence, identified in legacy code documentation." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched Lysander's lips, devoid of warmth. "Project Chimera," he murmured, a name from a past he thought entirely buried. "My dear Dr. Thorne's pet project, intended for calibration, as I recall." He paused, the implication hanging heavy in the air. Only Alexis Thorne would have the intimate knowledge of that specific, obscure protocol, let alone how to exploit its ghost signature in the modern system. "It was not a random attack," Lysander stated, turning back to the window. "Random noise does not possess the knowledge of deprecated creator protocols and specific buffer node vulnerabilities." "The signature points to deep system knowledge, sir," Thorne confirmed, his face impassive. "Possibly internal or someone with extensive past access." "Precisely," Lysander said. "Dr. Thorne's ghost, trying to haunt me, it seems." He scoffed softly. "Sentimental fools are so predictable." He turned fully to Thorne, his eyes hardening. "Initiate Section 4 lockdown protocols citywide. Enhance all network monitoring. Every data flicker, every unusual transaction, every unauthorized access attempt, no matter how small, is to be flagged and analyzed immediately. Focus priority on the mid-levels and the underlevels." This was too sophisticated for a simple rebel cell. Someone with genuine technical expertise is involved. Someone who knew exactly where to look and how asterisk to look for vulnerabilities I thought long sealed. "Sir, the source origin?" Thorne asked. Lysander's cruel anticipation was a predator scenting blood on the wind. The brief, audacious tendril that had pierced his domain had done more than simply annoy him. It had revealed an adversary intelligent enough to warrant his personal attention. His hunt had begun. Miles away, hidden in the city's belly, the perpetrators of that fleeting intrusion felt the immediate repercussions. The window had snapped shut violently, leaving behind not victory, but the chilling certainty that their action had achieved little tactical advantage, and instead drawn the gaze of the beast directly upon them. The glimpse they had stolen into the Spire's heart, though disturbing, now felt secondary to the cold, hard reality of their sudden, exposed vulnerability. In the quiet refuge of the archive, the cost of that brief intrusion settled heavy upon them. Reports filtered in, heightened security across sectors, compromised routes, whispers of comrades captured or lost. The casual depravity glimpsed in Lysander's domain suddenly felt horribly real, amplified by the concrete weight of their own immediate setback. It wasn't just a technical battle. It was a fight against an enemy who had forgotten the very concept of human value, and conventional weapons, physical or digital, seemed futile against such fundamental emptiness. They needed more than strategy. They needed a way to steel themselves against the emotional toll, to understand the profound difference between the grotesque spectacle above and the fragile, vital core of what they were fighting to protect. In the hushed hours that followed the failed intrusion, the core group gathered in the archive's central chamber, Alexis, Eve, and Kale, flanked by others whose faces mirrored the same grim exhaustion. The reports were stark. Lysander's network hadn't just segmented, It had coiled, security tightening like a fist around the city's arteries. Old channels were compromised, vital routes cut off, and whispers of sector arrests chilled the air. The fleeting glimpse into the spire's heart, with its grotesque perversion, now felt less like a revelation and more like a burden, heavy with the cost of their exposed presence. "Containment successful," Eve stated, her voice flat, gesturing to a projection detailing Lysander Corp's countermeasures. Complex firewalls had snapped into place, network nodes isolated, and what few residual creator access points remained were now dark or heavily monitored. "The payload might have flickered through, but we have no confirmation, and the window closed immediately." Cale ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, his usual stoic expression lined with frustration. "And the fallout isn't contained. Security is crawling over the mid-levels. 3 of our contacts near the old factory sector have gone silent. Could be coincidence, but the timing is notable." A low murmur went through the gathered echoes. While no direct casualties from the technical intrusion itself, the heightened security directly amplified the dangers for their operatives throughout Neo-Babylon. The abstract risk had become immediate and personal. "A wasted effort," one of the others muttered, barely audible. "We poke the bear and it just gets bigger." Cale fixed his gaze on Alexis, who sat hunched slightly, his eyes distant, still haunted by the images from the spire. "We used your knowledge, Thorne, got in, tried to hit them where they feel it, and all we did was give them a reason to hunt harder." Alexis finally looked up, his gaze meeting Cale's, then Eve's. The raw horror he'd felt seeing the users' faces was still etched on his features, but it was mixed with a cold resolve. "We tried to disrupt the spectacle," he said, his voice low. "But we didn't address the audience asterisk. The pleasure, Cale, the sheer, unadulterated joy they take in consuming suffering. That's not a technical problem. That's a sickness." He paused, searching for the words. "Our methods are external. Hacking, sabotage, physical disruption. Necessary, yes. But they don't touch the core of what Lysander has done. He's weaponized a fundamental human capacity, empathy, and twisted it into its opposite. He's made them addicts to cruelty." Eve crossed her arms. "So what? You want to give them a lecture on morality? We're fighting a corporation with an army of enforcers and half the city enthralled." "No," Alexis said, pushing himself straighter. "We need to understand the counterpoint. We need to remember what empathy felt asterisk-like. And we need to show them the difference. Lysander's TX is a perversion. It's a simulation designed to harvest sensation and profit, stripping away the humanity of both the victim and the user. It's asterisk-safe asterisk cruelty. What if we showed them what genuine connection to death feels like? Not the spectacle, but the truth." He looked around the weary faces. "My original goal wasn't to simulate the asterisk moment asterisk of death. It was to create a tool for understanding loss, for processing grief, for feeling the profound connection inherent in the final moments of a life, in the shared experience of mortality." Lysander took that framework and poured poison into it. He gestured vaguely towards the technical section. "I propose we use a modified TX interface, not for spectacle, not for anything Lysander would recognize, but to experience a recording that embodies the opposite of his work. Something pure. Something human." Skepticism rippled through the room. "Pure recording? What does that even mean?" someone asked. Alexis hesitated. "Before Lysander, when Dr. Elias and I were developing the therapeutic side, we created simulations. Controlled, ethical experiences designed to help people process trauma or understand loss. They weren't based on actual deaths, not in the way Lysander uses them. More like carefully constructed emotional landscapes, mirroring the asterisk feelings around death, not the physical event itself." He frowned. "Or Lysander's network monitors everything. Sometimes, when life ends naturally, peacefully, the network still captures residual biological data. If one of the echoes, if someone in our community passed naturally and their data was captured, ethically, we could potentially use a fragment of that." Eve's expression tightened. "Ethically? We're talking about using someone's death for, what, your therapy session?" "No," Alexis insisted, his voice firm. "For clarity, for us, for me asterisk, I need to do this. I need to confront what my creation was meant to be against what it is now. I need to remember the weight of asterisk true asterisk empathy. And if it helps us understand how to break the spell Lysander has cast. Cale remained silent, observing. Finally, he spoke. What's the risk? To the network. Minimal now. Lysander's hardened everything. This would be offline or on a completely isolated subnet. The risk is personal, psychological, emotional. Alexis met Cale's gaze directly. It will be difficult. More difficult in some ways than witnessing the spectacle because it requires open vulnerability, not detached observation. Eve looked from Alexis to Cale, then back to Alexis. She saw the desperation in his eyes, but also a glint of something she hadn't seen before, a fierce, protective instinct for the core idea he'd birthed. You think doing this will change something? It will change *me*, Alexis said quietly. And maybe it will give us insight into how to reach others, how to show them what they've lost. Cale nodded slowly. A psychological operation, then, against ourselves first. Risky, but our current path is costing us. If you think this gives us an edge, Thorne, do it. But be ready. If Lysander caught wind of this, if he knew you were reclaiming the heart of the technology, he wouldn't just shut it down. He'd depervert it again somehow. I understand, Alexis said, standing up. The weariness was still there, but now underscored by a new purpose. Eve, can you help me set it up? Is there an appropriate recording available? Eve hesitated for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she sighed. Lysander's net is pervasive. We monitor it, trying to scrub data points for people below the line. Sometimes, we find things before he does. Clean data, no biospikes from fear or pain, just fading. There was an old woman in Sector Gamma, died in her sleep last cycle. Part of our network, a quiet supporter. No family left. Her data fragment, it's clean, if anyone's is. Her voice was soft, respectful. It's stored, encrypted. Alexis nodded, a lump forming in his throat. That one, he said. That's the one we'll use. Scene 2, technical section of the archive, a makeshift lab area. The technical section of the archive was a controlled chaos of glowing screens, humming servers, and tangled cables repurposed from 100 different sources. Alexis and Eve worked in a relatively quiet corner, walled off by salvaged data racks, setting up the equipment. We need a completely isolated subnet, Alexis instructed, double-checking cable connections with practiced hands. No connection to the wider archive network, absolutely nothing touching the surface or Lysander's grid. Air-gapped. Physically secure the terminal. Eve was already working on the network isolation protocols. Done. It's a cold pocket. Nothing in, nothing out. We're running the interface on a repurposed medical diagnostic unit Lysander Corp. Probably discarded years ago. It's clean hardware. They were modifying a standard TX interface rig, the sleek, minimal headset and biomonitors Lysander used, but stripped down, reconfigured, and enhanced with Alexis's original safety parameters. The soft cushioning of the headset felt clinical, not luxurious like the ones he'd glimpsed in the Spire. The core difference isn't the hardware, Alexis explained as he loaded the encrypted data fragment onto a secured local drive. It's the data stream and the processing filter. Lysander's system amplifies specific physiological responses, adrenaline, cortisol, endorphins released during extreme stress or pain. It highlights the physical sensation of death. My original filter suppressed those, focusing on the slower, subtler biological shifts, the fading neural activity, the hormonal changes associated with peace or acceptance, the echoes of memory and emotion present in the final brain activity. It's about feeling the end of life, not the trauma of death. He plugged the data drive into the medical unit. On a small monitor, abstract waveforms flickered, electroencephalogram, electrocardiogram, faint respiration data, the digital ghost of a life's end. And the empathy component? Eve asked, wiping sweat from her brow. The archive was warm, the air thick with the smell of ozone and dust. That's the most complex part, Alexis said, running a calibration sequence. It relies on stimulating the mirror neurons, linking the recorded biological state to the user's own body chemistry and neural patterns. It's designed to create a sense of shared experience, of resonance rather than observation. It requires a high degree of safety monitoring because it's inherently invasive, blurring the line between self and other. Lysander bypasses the safety filters and hyperstimulates the reward centers, hijacking the empathy circuits for pleasure. We're restoring the original, ethical pathway. It's like showing someone the sunset instead of hitting them over the head with a brick painted orange. Eve watched him, her usual sharp cynicism softened by a reluctant curiosity. She'd seen what Lysander's TX did to people, turning them into monsters seeking validation through simulated atrocity. The idea that this same technology could evoke something asterisk else felt almost impossible. "You're sure about this, Alexis?" "Positive," he said, though his hands trembled slightly as he fastened a sensor to the modified headset. "This is what it was for. This is reclaiming it, but it won't be easy. It won't be pleasant in the way Lysander's users experience it. It will be real." Kale entered the section, observing their work from a distance. He didn't offer technical assistance, but his presence was a solid anchor. "We've set up the quiet room," he reported. Secured, monitored externally. "Are you ready, Thorne?" Alexis took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the simple headset. Ready wasn't the word. Terrified, perhaps, resolve, certainly. "Yes," he said, his voice steady. "I'm ready." Scene 3, a specially prepared, secure room within the archive. The room was small, stripped bare of anything that could be a distraction or a hazard. The walls were padded, dull gray, absorbing sound. A single, comfortable chair sat in the center, facing a blank wall. Beside it was a medical stand with the modified TX interface rig and a small monitor displaying Alexis's own vital signs. Eve and Kale stood behind a one-way mirrored observation window with a medic monitor present, keeping a close eye on the readings. Alexis sat in the chair, taking deep, measured breaths. He felt exposed, vulnerable. Not like undergoing surgery, where he was the detached professional, but like the patient, raw and open. Eve fitted the headset gently over his ears and eyes, adjusting the biomonitors on his temples and wrists. The sensors were soft, almost imperceptible. "Safety parameters are locked," Eve's voice came through the headset, calm and clinical. "Thresholds are set to your baseline. Any significant deviation and the sequence terminates immediately. You have an emergency manual override," she explained, indicating a subtle button on the side of the headset. "But try not to use it unless necessary. Full engagement is key." "The recording fragment is preloaded," Alexis confirmed, his voice slightly tight. "Approximately 7 minutes of neural and biological fade. No trauma signature, no fear spikes, just cessation." Kale's voice, deeper, came next. "We're watching, Thorne. Don't push yourself too hard." "Thank you," Alexis said, closing his eyes even before the visual feed began. He didn't want the external world to intrude. He wanted only the internal experience. He initiated the sequence. There was no sudden jolt, no flashy virtual environment. The visual feed was a soft, diffused light, perhaps mimicking the gradual dimming of perception. The audio was a low, almost imperceptible hum, the echo of internal processes slowing down. The real sensation began subtly, a mirrored physical resonance. A gradual slowing of his own heart rate, mirroring the recorded data, a shallowing of breath. It felt peaceful, not frightening, just quiet. Then came the emotions, filtered through the original empathy algorithms. Not overwhelming grief, but a profound sense of asterisk release asterisk, of letting go. There was a faint, distant echo of memory, not visual or auditory, but a feeling, the warmth of sunlight, the comfort of a familiar touch, the satisfaction of a life lived simply. It wasn't his life, but he felt it as if it were, the boundaries blurring between his consciousness and the recorded consciousness. The most powerful sensation wasn't physical, but relational. A sense of connection, of threads unraveling gently, not snapping. He felt the love, distant but palpable, of those who had known this person, even if they weren't present at the moment of death. He felt the quiet dignity of a life ending on its own terms. It wasn't the brutal, isolating terror Lysander manufactured. It was communion, a shared understanding of mortality. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and silent. Not tears of fear, but of profound sadness, tempered by a strange, quiet beauty. It was sorrow for the finite nature of life, for the inevitable separation, but also a deep, almost sacred peace in the face of it. He felt the slow ebb of the recorded life force, the gentle closing down of systems. It wasn't pain, it was absence gathering, a quiet acceptance. He felt the weight of it, the weight of a life ending, and the empathy that bound it to others. The experience lasted only a few minutes, perhaps less. Time became fluid. When the feed faded completely, leaving only the soft hum of his own body, Alexis didn't immediately open his eyes. He sat in the silence, the echoes of the shared experience reverberating through him. His body felt heavy, drained, but his mind was clear, sharp, with a painful, beautiful clarity. Behind the glass, Eve and Cale watched. Alexis's physiological readings had dipped significantly, but stayed within safe parameters thanks to the failsafes. His emotional state, however, had been clearly volatile on the monitors, spikes of sorrow, waves of calm, moments of intense, unreadable resonance. They had seen the tears escape his closed eyes, the trembling in his hands. When Alexis finally opened his eyes, they were red-rimmed but bright with a raw, undeniable conviction. He slowly removed the headset, his movements stiff. He looked utterly exhausted, but his expression was one of grim, unshakable determination. He met Eve's gaze through the mirror, then Cale's. He didn't need to say anything. The experience had purged him of the lingering guilt, replacing it with a renewed, visceral understanding of what he was fighting for. He had touched the soul of his creation, seen its true, profound potential, and felt the magnitude of Lysander's perversion like a physical blow. This wasn't about technology anymore. It wasn't just about taking down an evil corporation. It was about reclaiming something fundamental about what it meant to be human. It was about empathy. Lysander had turned death into spectacle, a commodity of perverse pleasure. Alexis had just re-experienced it as it was meant to be, a shared, profound, deeply human transition. The contrast was stark, horrifying, and clarifying. Getting out of the chair, Alexis swayed slightly, caught by the lingering sensation of lightness and absence. Cale moved to open the door, his expression sober. Eve remained by the monitor, watching Alexis's recovery, her face etched with a newfound understanding of the depth of his burden and the nature of the war he waged. The sterile chill of the archive planning room couldn't touch the profound shift within Alexis. The manufactured brush with mortality, the raw surge of empathy, had done more than just validate their fight. It had forged a new, razor-sharp certainty in the furnace of his soul. The true horror wasn't the simulation of death, but Lysander's attempt to rob humanity of its deepest connections. Knowing this, feeling the weight of that truth, simplified everything. The path forward, however perilous, became blindingly clear. To strip away the illusion, to force Neo-Babylon to confront the reality Lysander denied them, they couldn't chip away at the edges any longer. They had to strike at the source of his perversion, at the network that projected his false reality, at the very core of his power. The spire, Lysander's impenetrable stronghold within the ivory tower, wasn't just a symbol. It was the heart-pumping artificial life into his controlled world. Reaching it would be a near-impossible feat, a plunge into the enemy's most heavily guarded sanctuary, demanding a level of daring and sacrifice that chilled even Cale's resolve. But with the weight of their purpose finally understood, the seemingly insurmountable had become the only objective. The planning, however daunting, would begin now. Days blurred into nights within the archive's secured planning chamber, the sterile air thick with renewed purpose. The visceral clarity Alexis had gained from the simulated end now sharpened their focus, transforming abstract concepts into a tangible, albeit daunting, objective. Gathered around the main console, its screen displaying intricate, salvaged schematics of the ivory tower's upper reaches, Alexis, Eve, and Cale faced the maps and diagrams with grim determination. The time for periphery strikes was over. Empowered by a deeper understanding of their enemy, they were finally ready to target the very core. The air was heavy with the smell of recycled oxygen and the faint tang of circuitry. Stacks of data slates, scavenged network cables, and repurposed screens cluttered the central table. The main display glowed, an intimidating wireframe representation of Lysander's ivory tower, its upper levels a labyrinth of reinforced plating and encrypted access nodes. Beside Alexis sat Eve, her fingers restless on a blank data slate, her eyes scanning the architectural diagrams. Across from them, Cale leaned back slightly, arms crossed, his gaze sharp and assessing, occasionally glancing at the other Echo's strategists gathered around the edges of the room, faces etched with weariness, but alight with resolute focus. Alexis tapped a stylus against the glowing image of the spire, the topmost, most fortified section of the tower. "We tried the subtle approach," he began, his voice low but carrying the weight of recent experience. "Injecting data fragments." It barely registered, and Lysander's response was immediate and overwhelming. He doesn't care about evidence, he cares about maintaining the spectacle. He paused, looking at each face in turn. "We need to hit him where it hurts most. Not his finances, not his public image, but the Thanatos Experience Network itself, the core servers housed within the spire. That's the heart of his empire, the source of the addiction, the engine of the spectacle. Only by crippling or exposing the network from within can we truly hope to stop him." Eve nodded, leaning forward. "He segmented the network beautifully after our last attempt, but he can't air-gap the TX completely. It needs constant data streams. And we know about the residual creator access handshake on those specific buffer nodes we found in Chapter 4. The vulnerability is still there, if we can get physical access, even brief, to the core server cluster. I believe I can force a wider backdoor, or at least inject a payload that will destabilize the entire system, perhaps even broadcasting raw, unfiltered data from the victims." Her voice was calm, technical, but the intensity in her eyes betrayed the immense challenge she was proposing. "The physical access is the impossible part." Cale straightened, his chair scraping softly on the floor. "Impossible is a word we hear a lot down here," he said, his tone flat, pragmatic. "But difficult doesn't begin to cover the spire. It's the most secure structure in Neo-Babylon. Reinforced plasteel, optical sensors, pressure plates, thermal scanning, armed patrols on every level, internal automated defenses. Lysander built it specifically to protect his most valuable asset. Infiltration isn't just difficult, Alexis. It's a suicide mission for anyone who isn't a ghost." He gestured towards the glowing schematics. "Look at this. There are layers upon layers of security. Just getting into the ivory tower is a feat. Getting into the spire from there, crossing open, patrolled corridors, bypassing internal checkpoints that require biometric and asterisk encrypted key access. It's a logistical nightmare with a near-zero probability of success." A murmur rippled through the gathered strategists. Doubts, fears, and weary resignation flickered across their faces. This wasn't a daring raid or a digital disruption. This was a direct assault on the enemy's most heavily fortified bastion. "The risk is immense," one of the Echo's leaders, a woman named Anya, voiced the shared concern. "We could lose entire teams. For what? A chance?" "A chance to strike at the rot, Anya," Alexis countered, his newfound resolve firm. "Lysander isn't just selling death, he's manufacturing it, celebrating it. He's turning people into monsters addicted to the suffering of others. My experience with the true TX showed me what we're fighting for: reclaiming empathy, reminding people what it feels like to connect, to mourn, to be human. This isn't just about disabling technology, it's about shattering the illusion he's built." Eve added, "And Lysander knows we're out here. He's already tightening his net. Subtlety won't work, and waiting will only allow him to reinforce. If we don't strike now, while we still have the advantage of knowing certain deprecated system vulnerabilities he might overlook in the new layers, we might never get another chance." The debate continued, back and forth. The sheer danger was undeniable, the potential cost devastating. But Alexis's conviction, amplified by his recent harrowing personal experience, resonated. Cale listened, his expression unreadable, weighing the arguments. He understood the symbolic and strategic importance of the target. He also understood the harsh realities of boots on the ground. Finally, he spoke, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "It's the riskiest thing we've ever considered. We'll lose people. That has to be clear. But Alexis is right, and Eve is right. Lysander won't stop until he's untouchable. This is our moment, however small the window. If we hit the core, we don't just disrupt his business, we shatter his control over the spectacle. It might just be the only way to wake people up." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each strategist. "All right, we go for the spire. Targeting the core servers is the objective." A wave of grim determination settled over the room, replacing the doubt. The plan was set, no matter the cost. The mood shifted from debate to intense focus as the core group transitioned into the detailed planning phase. The planning chamber became a hive of activity. Alexis, his brow furrowed in concentration, pulled up archived schematics, data he'd saved years ago, long before Lysander had fully consolidated control and memory wiped or silenced former employees. He traced lines on the screen, pointing out access conduits he knew were likely still present, however neglected. Most access to the spire is through primary lift banks, secured lobbies, and internal service routes, Alexis explained, his voice almost clinical as he described the fortress that held his corrupted creation. But there were deprecated systems, maintenance shafts for original power conduits that ran vertically through the tower's skeletal structure. Service bays on certain levels that might link to older, unsecured utility corridors. He highlighted a section on the schematic, a tangle of lines near the base of the spire levels. This, level 320, it's a major power distribution hub. There was an old maintenance shaft leading down from there, intended for emergency access or heavy equipment movement. It bypassed several internal checkpoints. It's probably sealed now, but if we could reach it. Sealed we can breach, Cale stated, his mind already translating Alexis's technical details into physical obstacles and necessary gear. Getting to level 320 without triggering alarms is the problem. High traffic levels, constant patrols. He tapped another point on the schematic, near the building's core. What about service tunnels from below? Are there any connections that reach high enough? Alexis shook his head. The spire levels were designed with separate infrastructure feeds where possible. Minimize contamination risks. But there are external service access points lower down, street level, or slightly above for heavy deliveries, waste removal, things like that. They lead to a complex internal logistics network, getting from their asterisk up to the spire levels. That's traversing the most patrolled and monitored sections of the tower. Eve interjected, her fingers flying across her data slate, cross-referencing Alexis's schematics with live network data harvested by Echo's probes. Okay, bypassing the primary lift biometrics is out unless we have live samples, impossible. Standard access codes are useless. But if we can get onto level 320 or even a few levels below it, I might be able to exploit a vulnerability in the HVAC or power grid monitoring systems. They're older subsystems, potentially using some of the deprecated protocols Alexis mentioned. It could give us a temporary override for local sensors, maybe even a brief window to access a maintenance lift or unlock a service door. A brief window isn't much, Cale said, running a hand over his face. We need redundancy. Multiple entry vectors if possible. Diversions, both physical and digital. They worked meticulously, merging Alexis's intimate knowledge of the tower's architecture and internal systems with Eve's cutting-edge hacking strategies and Cale's brutal assessment of physical logistics. They identified potential routes: a high-altitude infiltration via a cleaning rig scaffold access point combined with a vertical descent via a maintenance shaft. A ground-level approach through a less-used service tunnel leading into the tower's guts, followed by a dangerous climb through internal service conduits. Or even a risky attempt to blend in with authorized personnel using forged credentials and a carefully orchestrated diversion. The plan that emerged was a complex, multi-pronged operation. Cale designated teams, infiltration teams, small units of highly trained Echo's rebels, assigned specific entry points and routes. A distraction team, tasked with creating chaos on lower or mid-levels of the tower to draw security away from the spire approach. A technical support team, staying in the archive but providing real-time network monitoring, digital diversions, and coordinating Eve's access efforts. And a small extraction team, positioned strategically to provide cover if things went sideways, a terrifyingly likely outcome. Alexis wasn't just advising. He was integrated into the core technical planning, identifying specific subnetworks Eve should target, predicting system responses, and highlighting areas where physical tampering might trigger silent alarms the digital team wouldn't see. Eve focused on mapping the spire's digital defenses, firewalls, intrusion detection systems, encrypted links. She planned a sequence of hacks. First, blinding security feeds in target areas. Second, creating network noise elsewhere in the tower. Third, attempting to leverage the creator handshake vulnerability to force entry into the core network layer. Kale planned the choreography of it all, timing every breach, every climb, every digital command to happen within a tightly controlled, rapidly shrinking window of opportunity. The sheer audacity of it, the tiny margin for error, hung heavy in the air. Across the archive and filtering up into the makeshift living spaces of the underlevels where some Echo's members resided, preparations began. The atmosphere was thick with a mixture of grim resolve and quiet fear. Teams gathered their gear, specialized climbing equipment adapted from industrial tools, non-metallic breaching tools, EMP grenades designed to temporarily fry localized sensors without widespread damage, encrypted comms units, compact medical kits, and the all-important digital tools Eve and her team had prepared. In one corner, Anya, the strategist who had voiced concern earlier, meticulously checked the feed mechanism of a grapnel gun, her face set in grim determination. Nearby, a group of younger rebels practiced rappelling techniques down a reinforced support column, their movements swift and silent. Kale moved among them, his presence a calm, authoritative anchor. He checked equipment, offered quiet advice, and met the eyes of each rebel, a silent acknowledgement of the risk they were about to undertake. There were hushed conversations, final messages recorded for loved ones they might never see again, embraces exchanged between comrades who knew this mission was different, that some might not return. Eve, sequestered in the technical hub, looked drained but focused. She ran simulations of her hacking sequence, her screen a blur of code, testing responses, identifying potential failure points. Alexis stood beside her for a time, watching the cascade of virtual firewalls fall before her precise attacks, a mix of pride in her skill and dread for the real-world application tightening in his chest. He checked and rechecked the schematics, memorizing routes, access codes he'd once known by heart, the ghost of his past life merging with the urgent reality of the present. Later, in a quiet corner, Kale went over the final plan with the core infiltration teams. He didn't sugarcoat it. The tower's on high alert. Lysander is expecting something after the last attempt. Every shadow is watched, every signal monitored. We break through the perimeter at T-0. Team Alpha hits the service bay diversion. Team Beta takes the high ascent. Team Gamma, with Alexis and Eve, uses the level 320 conduit. Gamma's your objective, reach the core servers. Alpha and Beta are decoys, drawing fire. If you get compromised, your priority is to create as much chaos as possible to buy Gamma time. Extraction isn't guaranteed. You know the risks. The silence that followed was potent, charged with the weight of their commitment. Alexis watched them, the faces of the men and women willing to risk everything because he had shown them another way, because Eve had given them a voice, because Kale had given them purpose. His guilt over his invention had morphed into a fierce protectiveness of these people, these echoes fighting against the dehumanization he had inadvertently enabled. He was no longer just the inventor. He was a rebel leader, bound by a shared purpose and a terrifying objective. They were ready. All the planning, the sleepless nights, the gathered intelligence, the salvaged gear, the stolen data, the carefully synced timing, it all led to this single, terrifying moment. They stood at the precipice, the imposing, sterile mass of the ivory tower looming above, its upper levels disappearing into the city's perpetual haze. This wasn't just a building. It was the heart of Lysander's control, a fortress of steel and surveillance, a monument to the spectacle they aimed to shatter. This was the mouth of the beast, and they were about to step inside. With one final, silent exchange of glances, a shared acknowledgement of the abyss they were willingly entering, they began. The outer layer of Lysander's domain felt unnervingly quiet, but that silence was a lie, a deceptive calm before the storm of automated defenses, laser grids, and watchful eyes they knew were waiting just beyond the threshold. There was no turning back now. The mission to infiltrate the spire had begun. Stepping past the threshold felt like passing through a veil into another dimension, sterile and silent. The deceptive calm outside was replaced by an unnerving stillness within the ivory tower's lowest service level, the air thick with the hum of unseen systems and the metallic scent of recycled air. Alexis moved with practiced caution gleaned from old schematics, while Eve's fingers already danced across a silenced interface on a nearby panel. They were inside now, the impossible task of reaching the spire's core, servers a multi-layered maze stretching out before them, each shadow potentially hiding a watchful eye or a lethal defense. Kale's team, a dozen silent figures cloaked in shadow-dispersing fabric fanned out, securing their immediate perimeter. The entry had been via a rarely used service conduit below the building's auxiliary power hub, a route Alexis had identified from decade-old blueprints, betting Lysander's system upgrades wouldn't have fully sealed off legacy infrastructure. It was a calculated risk, a gamble on the old bones beneath the gleaming facade. Status! Kale's voice was a low rumble through their comms, barely a whisper. Initial system bypass achieved, Eve murmured, her eyes glued to the faint green script scrolling across her wrist-mounted display. Perimeter sensors show green, no immediate alerts triggered by the ingress point. Looks like those old conduits are truly off-grid, at least at this level. Good, Kale replied. Our diversion is online in Sector Gamma. Thermal readings increasing. Should draw some attention topside soon. We have perhaps 15 minutes before they start sweeping the lower levels. Alexis nodded, consulting a compact data slate displaying a schematic overlay he'd painstakingly reconstructed. The main service spine is 2 levels up, accessed via a reinforced stairwell here. He pointed a gloved finger at a diagram on his screen. It runs almost vertically through the tower. Heavily monitored, but faster than navigating the crawlspaces. Their team, smaller than Kale's primary defense unit, but hand-picked for agility and technical skill, moved like phantoms. Alexis, despite his years away from physical exertion, felt a strange surge of adrenaline sharpening his senses. He wasn't just guiding them with forgotten knowledge. He was acutely aware of the weight of his inaction, the lives lost, the cruelty enabled by his creation. Every step through this sterile fortress was an act of penance. Reaching the stairwell entrance, they found it sealed by a heavy blast door with an integrated biometric scanner. Eve was already at work, her data probe sliding into a hidden port. Standard Type-C lock, she reported, her breath held tight. Should be able to spoof it with the cloned data from the delivery manifest scans if Lysander hasn't patched this particular vulnerability. Seconds stretched into an agonizing minute. The air hummed with the distant thrum of the tower's immense power systems, punctuated by the frantic tap of Eve's fingers. A soft click echoed in the confined space. The heavy door hissed open an inch. Got it, Eve breathed, relief evident in her voice. Kale gave a curt nod. Go, move fast, leave no trace. His team melted back into the shadows of the lowest level. Alexis, Eve, and their infiltration unit slipped through the gap, the door hissing shut behind them, plunging them into a new layer of the beast's belly. They were inside. The sterile, silent environment of the ivory tower's internal layers was a stark contrast to the teeming, grimy chaos of the underlevels or the makeshift functionality of the archive. Here, everything was polished chromium and matte gray panels, devoid of personality, designed for function and control. Motion-activated lights flickered on ahead, casting long, sterile shadows. The air was perfectly filtered, odorless save for the faintest metallic tang. It felt less like a building and more like the inside of a machine. They navigated the service corridors with practiced efficiency, their footsteps muted by specialized boots. Automated defenses were everywhere, silent sentinels awaiting activation. Tiny optical sensors embedded in the walls tracked heat signatures and motion, linked to larger surveillance drones that occasionally zipped silently down the long hallways. Floor panels concealed pressure sensors, and certain junctions were guarded by invisible laser grids. Drone, 11 o'clock, whispered one of the team members, pointing subtly down a side corridor. A sleek, silent drone hovered midair, its single, red eye sweeping the area. On it, Eve responded instantly, her fingers flying across her console. Linking to its command node, injecting sleep sequence, confirmed. It's offline for 90 seconds. Let's move. They sprinted past the inert drone, ducking into a narrow service tunnel that Alexis had identified as running parallel to the main access spine. The tunnel was cramped, filled with thick conduits and bundles of fiber-optic cables, the air warmer and faintly dusty. Another relic Lysander hadn't bothered to fully modernize. "This is where my old schematics are most reliable," Alexis grunted, squeezing past a massive power cable. "These tunnels haven't been upgraded in decades. Security here is minimal, relying on the automated systems in the main corridors." They moved in single file, guided by the soft glow of Alexis's data slate and Eve's wrist display. The silence was broken only by their breathing and the faint scrape of gear. Each turn felt like stepping deeper into enemy territory. Suddenly, a low, insistent hum vibrated through the metal floor. "Proximity alert," Eve hissed, her voice tight with tension. "Security sweep bot. Main corridor heading our way." "It's networked, I can't disable it without tripping a system-wide alarm." "How close?" Alexis asked, pressing himself flat against the cool metal wall of the tunnel. 20 meters and closing. It follows a predictable patrol pattern, but this tunnel entrance is right in its path. There was no cover in the narrow tunnel. Retreating would take too long. "There!" Alexis pointed to a section of wall where several large conduits disappeared into a sealed panel. "Utility access panel. Should be an old manual override behind it for maintenance. Might be able to slip inside the wall cavity." Eve was already at the panel, a small cutting torch hissing for a brief second before she pried it open. A dark, narrow space was revealed, filled with more cables and pipes. "Move!" Alexis urged. They scrambled into the cavity just as the bot's heavy footsteps echoed in the main corridor outside. They pressed themselves against the cold metal and insulation, listening. The bot passed the tunnel entrance, its optical sensors sweeping the empty space, then continued on its patrol. Holding their breath until the sound faded, they carefully emerged, securing the panel as best they could. Sweat beaded on Alexis's forehead. It was a close call, the kind the plan hadn't explicitly accounted for, but Alexis's memory of the tower's hidden architecture had saved them. Eve's ability to react and utilize that knowledge under pressure was just as critical. They pushed on, the close encounter heightening their awareness and tension. Hours seemed to crawl by in the sterile maze. They bypassed force field emitters with timed data packets from Eve, crawled through ventilation shafts, smelling faintly of ozone, and navigated maintenance catwalks suspended high above cavernous server rooms, glimpses of the digital heart of Lysander's empire humming below. With each level they ascended, the security layers grew thicker, the automated systems more sophisticated, and the patrols less predictable. Finally, guided by Alexis's internal compass and Eve's network triangulation, they reached the access points to the spire. It wasn't a single entrance, but a series of reinforced checkpoints and blast doors guarding an elevator bank encased in a transparent, shimmering field, the vertical artery leading directly to the highest levels, where Lysander resided and the core TX servers were housed. This area pulsed with a palpable energy, the air crackling with ambient static from the powerful systems nearby. This was the final barrier, the point of no return. The security here was unlike anything they had faced below. Guard stations were manned by Lysander's elite private security, their armor sleek and menacing, their weapons held ready. Optical scanners scanned the area relentlessly, linked to AI predictive analysis systems that could flag anomalous behavior almost instantly. The shimmery field around the elevator bank wasn't just for show. It was a sophisticated energy barrier designed to repel physical intrusion. "This is the main spire access," Alexis confirmed, his voice low. "The elevator system is isolated from the rest of the tower network, direct link to the spire's command deck." "And the shield?" Eve asked, peering at the shimmering field. "Energy barrier, keyed to specific genetic markers and clearance codes," Alexis explained, recalling the project's initial security specifications before Lysander twisted them. But the original power coupling still uses an old harmonic frequency regulator. It's deprecated tech. Might be a way to overload it temporarily. Overload it how? Pulse a specific frequency through the local power grid, Alexis said, his mind racing. It'll require tapping directly into the conduit feeding the regulator, and a massive data spike to mask the energy surge on their sensors. Massive data spike and tapping into the conduit, Eve mused, her eyes scanning the panels around the elevator bank. Okay, there's a junction box here. Looks like it feeds auxiliary power to the regulator. I can interface, but I'll need direct access for a few minutes. And the data spike, it'll take everything I have, focusing all our network bandwidth through this node. It will trigger alerts, high-level alerts. As if on cue, a distant klaxon wailed, a low, mournful sound that echoed through the polished corridors. Diversion S worked its course. Kale's voice crackled over the comms, surprisingly calm. They know. Security is converging on our location. Estimated 4 minutes to contact. 4 minutes. Not enough time for a complex bypass or a silent approach. We have to make our move now, Alexis said, drawing the energy pistol he felt clumsy holding. All right, Eve said, her focus narrowing. Team, secure the junction box. I need cover. Alexis, get ready with the frequency pulse. I'll tell you when to hit it. The Echo's infiltration team moved swiftly, taking cover behind pillars and console banks, setting up defensive positions. Alexis positioned himself near the junction box, preparing the small, jury-rigged device he carried, a remnant of his lab equipment modified to emit a high-frequency pulse. Eve knelt before the junction box, prying open the cover and exposing a nest of glowing wires. The hum in the air intensified, the lights in the corridor beginning to flicker. Heavy, rhythmic thudding echoed from down the hallway, security forces in full combat gear. They're here, a rebel whispered. Laser fire erupted, red beams scarring the polished walls. The Echoes returned fire, their energy weapons spitting bursts of concentrated light. The sterile corridor became a chaotic zone of combat, the clean lines broken by smoke and the acrid smell of burnt circuitry. Stay on Eve, Kale's voice roared over the comms, though he wasn't physically with their immediate group. It seemed his element had engaged security further down, buying them precious time. Protect her, Alexis ducked behind a console as a beam of energy vaporized the panel above his head. He saw one of the rebels fall, clutching a smoking wound in their arm. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through his determination, but he shoved it down. This wasn't about fear, it was about what he owed them, what he owed the victims. Eve worked frantically, sparks flying from the junction box. Almost there, synchronizing data flood, get ready, Alexis. More security guards poured into the corridor, their movements precise and brutal. The Echo's team, outnumbered, fought fiercely, pushing back with desperate resolve. Another rebel cried out and crumpled to the floor, unmoving. The sound was swallowed by the din of battle. Now, Eve yelled, "Pulse it!" Alexis activated the device. A high-pitched whine filled the air, vibrating in his teeth. On the shimmering shield around the elevator bank, visible fluctuations began to ripple, the barrier flickering violently. "Shield destabilizing," Eve shouted, her eyes wide. "It's working, but security is about to breach our position." The remaining Echoes fighters were being overwhelmed. The elite security forces, highly trained and ruthless, were closing in, their energy shields deflecting return fire. They were seconds away from being overrun. Go. Get to the elevator, Alexis yelled to Eve and the few remaining rebels. I'll cover you. Eve hesitated, looking at the fallen rebels, then at Alexis. But, go, that shield won't hold. Alexis pushed her towards the still flickering barrier, firing his pistol at the advancing guards. He saw 2 more rebels fall, defending their retreat. With a final surge of energy, the shimmering barrier around the elevator bank dissolved completely, leaving the polished metal doors exposed. Eve, pulling one injured rebel with her, scrambled towards the opening. "Alexis!" she screamed, reaching out a hand. He fired another shot, holding the line for just a moment longer. The security forces were right on top of him. He saw the cold, emotionless faces behind the visors, the muzzles of their weapons tracking him. "Go!" he yelled again, turning and diving towards the elevator entrance. The smooth, silent ascent of the elevator was a stark, unnerving contrast to the violence they had left behind. The screams, the blasts, the tearing metal all faded to a muted thrum below, sealing them inside the very heart of the enemy's domain. Here, within the cold, polished metal walls, the weight of the fallen echoes settled heavy on Alexis's chest. They were cut off, isolated within Lysander's citadel, having paid dearly just to step inside. The fight to breach the outer defenses was over, but the impossible task had only just begun its terrifying climb towards the spire's core. Now, the true challenge lay not just in navigating steel corridors or bypassing digital sentinels, but in confronting the dark power source itself, the engine of Lysander's empire and the twisted mind that commanded it. Every meter the elevator rose carried them closer to that terrible heart, closer to the confrontation that would determine not just their survival, but the fate of every soul Lysander preyed upon. They had stepped into the lion's den, and the beast awaited them at the peak, ready to test not just their strength, but the very foundation of their beliefs. The silent ascent ended with a soft hiss, revealing not sterile corridors but a vast space humming with the palpable energy of Lysander's dominion. Stepping out, the cold air and the weight of their losses settled, leaving Alexis and Eve isolated within the core levels of the spire. Their impossible climb had delivered them to the threshold of the enemy's heart, where the true challenge, the engine and the mind that controlled it, now awaited. The chamber was immense, far larger than Alexis had imagined. Not a typical server room, but something designed for spectacle and worship. Soaring crystalline structures pulsed with internal light, housing racks upon racks of processors and data conduits that seemed to twist and writhe like luminous vines. Holographic displays shimmered overhead, showing complex, flowing data streams, abstracted visualizations of neural activity, and geometric patterns that shifted with an unsettling, organic rhythm. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the floor, the sound of unimaginable processing power dedicated to the simulation of death. This was the engine of the Thanatos experience, the technological heart of Lysander's empire, and its power felt terrifyingly absolute. And Lysander was waiting. He stood near the center of the chamber, before a console built into one of the massive crystalline nodes. He was alone, dressed in a tailored suit the color of polished obsidian, his posture relaxed, almost casual. He offered no armed resistance, no guards immediately visible. Just Lysander Vance, surrounded by the monstrous child of Alexis's original dream, calmly observing their arrival. His smile was thin, devoid of warmth. Dr. Thorne. And your little ghost, I presume. His gaze flickered to Eve, who remained close to Alexis, her eyes scanning the chamber's architecture with an almost frantic intensity. A rather dramatic entrance even for you, Alexis, though I confess I expected a slightly larger entourage. Casualties in the underlevels, perhaps. That section can be unpredictable. The casual cruelty of his words, referencing the loss of their team with such dismissive ease, struck Alexis like a physical blow. The sacrifice of Kale's unit, the injured rebel they had been forced to leave behind, the weight of it pressed down. But he didn't flinch, his gaze locked onto Lysander. You know why we're here, Lysander. Oh, I have an excellent idea, Lysander said, spreading his hands slightly. You've come to confront me to strike a blow against my empire. To, what was it? Reclaim the soul of your invention. A rather poetic notion for a man of science, wouldn't you agree? He gestured around the humming chamber. Look at it, Alexis, my empire, built on your foundation, but perfected by me. Eve took a cautious step forward, her eyes darting between Lysander and the central console. This isn't perfection, Vance, it's a perversion, using innocent lives for your grotesque entertainment. Lysander's smile widened slightly. Innocent? Perhaps, but entertainment? Absolutely. And entertainment, my dear ghost, is what people truly crave. Forget bread and circuses. Neo-Babylon wants sensation. It wants to feel something, anything beyond the sterile predictability of their lives. And what sensation is more profound, more absolute than the end? He paused, his eyes finding Alexis's again. You designed it to heal, Alexis, to help people process grief. A noble lie. I saw its true potential. The raw, undiluted experience of mortality. A narcotic like no other. It's not about healing for you, Alexis stated, his voice steady despite the tremor of rage beneath it. It's about power, control, turning human suffering into profit. And what is profit, Alexis? Lysander countered, beginning to circle them slowly, his movements fluid, predatory, if not the ultimate expression of value, the value of a unique sensation, a forbidden experience. You see victims, I see content. Raw, visceral content that my clients pay handsomely for. He stopped, facing Alexis directly. You believe in this moral compass, don't you? This inherent goodness in humanity that simply needs to be pointed in the right direction. Tell me, Alexis. He swept a hand encompassing the glittering spires visible through the chamber's reinforced viewport, hinting at the city below. Do you truly believe they would stop if I simply turned it off? The jaded elite above, gorging on simulated death. The masses below, desperate for any escape. They crave the thrill, the power, the brief, intoxicating glimpse into the void. I am not the architect of their depravity, Alexis. I am merely the purveyor of their deepest desires. As Lysander spoke, Eve had moved with quiet purpose towards a smaller, auxiliary console set against the curved wall of the chamber. It looked older, less integrated with the main system's crystalline aesthetic. This was the key. He's talking to distract you, she murmured to Alexis, her voice low, urgent. Her fingers flew over the console's interface, accessing buried ports, bypassing security protocols with practiced ease. This is an older diagnostic node. Might still have the handshake active. Give me cover. Alexis understood instantly. While Lysander waxed philosophical about humanity's fallen nature, Eve was initiating their real plan, the upload of the virus, the broadcast, the calculated destruction of the engine powering Lysander's spectacle. Alexis turned his full attention back to Lysander, stepping slightly between him and Eve. You're wrong, Lysander. Empathy isn't a lie. It's what makes us human. What you've done is sever that connection. You've built a cage of sensation, trapping people in their own heads, feeding them cruelty instead of connection. A cage? Lysander scoffed. They flocked to it. They begged for more. I simply gave them permission to indulge their true selves. You tried to force them towards some idealized version of humanity. I embraced what they actually are. Which of us, Alexis, is the true realist? A realist sees the potential for both. Alexis shot back, the conviction hardening his voice. The capacity for great harm, yes, but also for compassion, for understanding. You chose to nurture the worst part. You chose to commit murder for profit. Lysander's eyes narrowed, the calm facade beginning to crack. Minor, necessary, externalities. They were people, Lysander, with lives, with families, forced into their final moments so your clients could get a cheap thrill. Alexis remembered the faces Eve had shown him in the archive, the stark video evidence. They were not content, they were victims. Lysander took a step back, his gaze flickering towards Eve. You've been busy, haven't you, Ghost? Snooping through my archives. He straightened, the casual air vanishing, replaced by cold command. Security, intrusion in the core chamber. Alarms blared, a piercing, insistent shriek that cut through the low hum of the servers. Red emergency lights pulsed, bathing the chamber in an ominous glow. Heavy footsteps pounded in the distance, growing closer. They're here, Eve yelled, her head bent over the console, fingers flying. Almost there. Alexis, hold them. Security forces, clad in sleek, dark armor, burst through reinforced entry points at opposite ends of the chamber. They moved with ruthless efficiency, energy weapons raised. Lysander retreated slightly, positioning himself behind one of the crystalline structures, observing the scene with chilling detachment. Alexis, unarmed in the conventional sense, reacted instinctively. His mind, still sharp with the architectural knowledge of the spire, raced. The chamber's infrastructure wasn't just for show. He lunged for a small, recessed panel near the auxiliary console Eve was using. It was an old environmental control interface, tied into the chamber's localized cooling and atmospheric regulation. Systems he had originally designed before Lysander took over. He ripped the cover open, exposing a mess of conduits and junction boxes. Eve, can you reroute power through these? He shouted over the din of alarms and approaching footsteps. Focused burst, maybe overload the atmospheric processors near the entry points. Doing it. Eve responded, not looking up, her free hand reaching for a cable to bridge a connection Alexis had just exposed. Might trigger localized containment. Give me 15 seconds. The first security detail reached their position. Energy bolts lanced out, impacting the crystalline structures, causing brief, contained flares. Alexis ducked, grabbing a loose length of heavy-duty cabling, useless as a weapon, but maybe a makeshift shield or distraction. He didn't have Kale's combat training, but he had determination and the desperate need to protect Eve. He parried a low-energy blast with the cable, the insulating sheath smoking. Another bolt scorched the ground near his feet. He saw an opening as one guard advanced too aggressively, trying to flank Eve. Alexis lunged forward not to fight, but to use the environment. He slammed his shoulder against a console base near the guard, triggering an emergency lockdown sequence he designed years ago. A heavy blast door slammed down from the ceiling, splitting the first wave of security, trapping 3 guards on the other side. 10 seconds, Eve yelled. Sparks flew from the panel she worked on. The remaining guards, now focused, converged. Alexis dodged, using the crystalline servers and holographic displays as cover, drawing fire away from Eve. He noticed Lysander, his face a mask of annoyance rather than fear, gesturing impatiently from behind his cover. This wasn't just a fight, it was a disruption to Lysander's carefully controlled world, and that seemed to enrage him more than the physical threat. Alexis saw a guard lining up a shot on Eve. Without thinking, he grabbed a heavier piece of equipment, a diagnostic drone cradle, and hurled it towards the guard. It wasn't precise, but it forced the guard to duck, the shot going wide. 5 seconds, Eve ripped her connection free from the panel just as the second security team reached the auxiliary console, their energy weapons trained on her. Now, she shrieked. A sudden, violent shudder ran through the entire chamber. Not a physical tremor, but a system-wide feedback loop. The low hum of the servers spiked to a deafening whine. The holographic displays flickered wildly, geometric patterns dissolving into static, then reforming into brief, jarring flashes of imagery. The distorted faces of victims, fleeting glimpses of sterile rooms, fragmented audio snippets of final breaths and frantic alarms. The air processor's Alexis had targeted overloaded, venting supercooled coolant in misty geysers, creating a blinding fog around the entry points. Security guards recoiled, their sensors overwhelmed by the data spike and environmental chaos. Lysander cried out in fury as his pristine displays were corrupted by the raw, forbidden data. "It's broadcasting," Eve shouted over the noise, pointing at the main overhead display. The abstract visualizations were gone, replaced by the same glitching, horrifying flashes of victim data, amplified, raw, undeniably real. It wasn't just in the chamber. Alexis knew it was hitting the entire network, being routed through Lysander's own infrastructure to anyone tuned into a TX feed, potentially to the city itself. System overload triggered, core functions destabilizing. The chamber plunged into semi-darkness as primary lighting failed, emergency red pulsing faster. The sound of the servers devolved from a hum to a tortured shriek, then a series of sharp cracks and popping sounds. One of the massive crystalline structures housing server racks flared violently, showering sparks before its internal light died, plunging that section into shadow. Lysander emerged from behind his cover, his face contorted with rage and disbelief. He saw Eve, saw Alexis, saw the broadcast playing out on his crippled systems. "You fool!" he roared, advancing on them. "You've ruined everything." Before he could reach them, the ground beneath their feet vibrated violently. The spire itself seemed to groan under the strain of the system overload. More server nodes failed, collapsing inwards with terrifying crunches. The auxiliary console Eve had used sparked and died. "We have to go." Eve grabbed Alexis's arm, pulling him towards the entry point where the blast door had trapped some of the security force. In the chaos, with their internal communications likely jammed by the overload, the remaining security was disoriented, trying to regain control. Lysander hesitated, looking from the failing core servers to the retreating figures of Alexis and Eve. He was a man whose power was derived entirely from control and information. In this moment, surrounded by the crumbling heart of his empire, the choice was stark: attempt to salvage his technology or pursue the engineers of its destruction. Another violent shudder ran through the chamber, and a section of the ceiling plating detached, crashing down near Lysander. He flinched back, his decision made. He turned, sprinting towards a private access way near his central console, likely an escape route. Alexis and Eve didn't hesitate. They scrambled through the gap next to the dropped blast door, dodging bewildered security guards struggling with their malfunctioning equipment and the disorienting broadcast data still bleeding through their systems. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and burning circuitry. The alarms didn't just blare. They screamed through failing systems, a raw, dying note for Lysander's crumbling empire. But their success had turned the spire itself into a tomb, its metallic heart failing and dragging the towering structure down around them. Steel buckled, conduits exploded, and the floor vibrated with the heavy, determined tread of converging security forces. They were caught in the deadly backlash of their own strike, deep within a collapsing monument built on spectacle, the immediate consequence of unleashing raw truth upon a city built on careful illusion. There was no safe way out, only a desperate, perilous path through the chaos they had unleashed. Yet, the fight wasn't over. Not the desperate sprint through service tunnels and crumbling corridors to outrun gravity and Lysander's guard, nor the far greater conflict just beginning outside. The compass had guided them to the core, but now they had to navigate the chaotic, unpredictable currents of its destruction, hoping against hope that the echoes of their defiance would reach further than the sirens and the falling stone, out into the uneasy dawn breaking over Neo-Babylon, whose reaction to the truth was yet to be seen. Steel groaned, then tore, as the spire's core systems choked and died around them. Alarms blared a frantic, broken rhythm, a soundtrack to the building's final throes and the heavy, closing footsteps of Lysander's security. Alexis pulled Eve through the fractured lockdown door, plunging them into the labyrinthine service tunnels, their only path forward a desperate gamble against converging guards and a structure actively trying to crush them. Outside, the city was waking to an uncertain dawn, unaware of the echoes of truth now loose, but for Alexis and Eve, only the immediate, deadly chaos inside the dying tower mattered. Dust rained down from cracking conduits overhead. The air, normally sterile and circulating, now tasted of burnt ozone and fear. Alexis's lungs burned, and a dull ache throbbed in his side from where a security guard's baton had grazed him during the chaotic skirmish outside the elevator. Eve moved beside him, her movements precise and silent despite the surrounding cacophony, her focus entirely on navigating the crumbling passages. "Which way?" she whispered, her voice tight with urgency. Alexis consulted the cracked screen of his data slate, the archaic schematic barely visible through the static interference caused by the failing systems. Section 4, Maintenance Conduit Beta, connects to the old HVAC trunk line, he gasped, pointing down a narrow, debris-strewn passage. It should lead down towards the lower service levels, away from the main security convergence points. They scrambled forward, the sounds of distant shouting and the rhythmic thud of heavy boots echoing behind them. The spire, a monument to Lysander's technological hubris, was dying around them, a twisted metal and synth crystal corpse. Lights flickered and died, plunging sections into sudden darkness, forcing them to rely on the weak beams of their utility lights. They passed fallen debris, sparking wires, and the occasional sight of Lysander Corp's security, confused and retreating, their mission parameters likely dissolving with the collapse of the core. "Lysander," Eve began, panting softly. "He fled," Alexis confirmed, his voice grim. "Through a private exit, typical." The rage coiled in his gut was cold now, a simmering residue of the white-hot fury that had fueled him in the core chamber. Lysander was gone for now, but his system was broken. They reached the maintenance conduit, a tight, vertical shaft reeking of stagnant air and mold. Alexis kicked aside a rusted grate. "Down here, careful." They descended, rappelling down thick cables that groaned under their weight, the only sound their harsh breathing and the continued structural protests of the tower above. As they dropped lower, the chaos seemed to subside, replaced by a nervous, watchful quiet. Security was consolidating around the higher levels, focused on the source of the failure. From gaps in the old infrastructure, they caught glimpses of the city outside through fortified windows. Dawn was indeed breaking, painting the sky in sickly shades of orange and gray. And below, on the myriad screens plastered across buildings, the first signs of disruption were visible. Some screens were simply blank, displaying emergency shutdown messages. Others flickered erratically, showing news anchors in states of bewildered confusion. A few displayed glitching, horrific images, fragments of the raw data Eve had injected before the core overloaded, snippets of terror, pain, and death broadcast unfiltered, unintended. "It worked," Eve murmured, pointing towards a massive public display that showed a distorted, fleeting image of a face contorted in agony before abruptly cutting to a corporate logo. "The broadcast, it got out." "And the TX?" Alexis asked, his heart pounding with a different kind of fear now, the fear of failure, of his creation's continued perversion. Eve checked her data slate, accessing network diagnostics via a secure channel. A slow smile spread across her face, weary but genuine. "Cascading system failures, network paralysis. Lysander's core, it's offline. The Thanatos experience is down." A wave of dizzying relief washed over Alexis, quickly followed by the heavy weight of what it had cost. The faces of the rebels who had fallen defending them flashed in his mind. The mission was a success, technically, but the price was etched onto his soul. They continued their descent, lower and lower, through decaying infrastructure and forgotten service tunnels, the sounds of the dying spire fading behind them. They moved through sectors that grew progressively grimier, the air thicker with the smells of industry and desperation, familiar territory for the Echoes. Finally, they reached a designated rendezvous point, a forgotten entry hatch hidden behind a refuse processing unit. A figure emerged from the shadows as they approached. "Kale." Alexis felt a surge of relief. Kale nodded, his face grim and smudged with grime. "Thorne, Eve. Good to see you made it." He looked past them, a silent question in his eyes. "That was it," Eve said softly. "Just us." Kale's jaw tightened. He turned and led them into the warren of tunnels, back towards the archive, the dawn light of Neo-Babylon irrelevant now that they were once again swallowed by the underlevels. The air in the archive was thick with a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and sorrow. The core group of the Echoes who had remained behind were gathered in the main chamber, their faces etched with anticipation and dread. Kale led Alexis and Eve into the room, and a hush fell over the rebels. Kale addressed them, his voice flat. "They're back, that's it for the Spire team." A ripple of grief went through the room. They all knew the odds. They had lost friends, comrades, family. Alexis stood awkwardly for a moment, the weight of their sacrifice pressing down on him. These people who had nothing had risked and given everything to strike a blow against the system he had inadvertently helped create. Eve stepped forward, her voice clearer, stronger. "The mission objectives were met. The Thanatos experience network is down. Multiple core systems in the Spire are disabled, likely irreparable in the short term." A murmur of cautious celebration went through the room. It wasn't a roar of triumph, but a weary acknowledgement of a significant victory. "And the broadcast?" one of the technical team asked, their eyes wide. Eve brought up a feed on a salvaged screen. It wasn't a clean, cohesive message. System overload and filtering protocols fought it, but fragments, raw data streams from the buffer nodes, they got through. For a few minutes, across a significant portion of the city's public displays, snippets of the truth were broadcast. Unfiltered. Unsanitized. The screen showed chaotic news reports, analysts speculating wildly about a system anomaly, Lysander Corp officials issuing immediate, generic denials of a routine technical fault. But tucked within the frantic coverage were user feeds from the Citadel, showing people recording their screens, capturing glimpses of those horrific, glitching images before they were scrubbed or replaced by calming corporate logos. Hashtags were already appearing, confused and questioning. Spire glitch TX down, hash what was that? "It's chaos," Eve said, a flicker of satisfaction in her tired eyes. "They can deny it, they can censor it, but the Echoes are out there. Enough people saw something they weren't supposed to see." "Lysander?" Kale asked, his gaze sharp. "He escaped the Spire," Alexis confirmed, the admission tasting like ash. "His private exit was functional." Cale nodded, unsurprised. Figures, he'll be regrouping. Pulling strings, Lysander Corp won't disappear overnight. They'll go into lockdown. There will be a massive crackdown. We need to assess our losses, a woman with a bandage wrapped around her arm stated, her voice hoarse. The Sector Gamma diversion team, comms went silent an hour ago. We haven't heard from half of them. A wave of fresh grief washed over the chamber. Names were whispered, faces remembered. The cost was immense. They had crippled Lysander's spectacle, unleashed a sliver of truth, but the blood of their comrades stained the victory. Cale's face was a mask of grim determination. We mourn later. Right now, we plan. Lysander will be hunting us. He knows who hit him, knows the signature. We need to move the archive, disperse, go deeper underground. This was a victory, yes, but it just bought us time. The war isn't over. It's just entered a new phase. The room, filled with weary but resolute faces, seemed to shrink as the weight of the future settled upon them. The Thanatos experience was silenced, for now, but the fight for Neo-Babylon had just begun. Hours later, after the difficult process of dismantling and packing away sensitive equipment, after the somber acknowledgement of their fallen, Alexis found himself standing with Eve at a makeshift observation point. It was a high ledge within the underlevels, overlooking a vast, grated shaft that offered a filtered view of the city far above. Neo-Babylon glowed in the artificial twilight, a network of cold, indifferent lights. "They're spinning it," Eve said, pointing towards a distant screen embedded in a towering building. The official narrative was firming up. A critical system malfunction, isolated incident. Security protocols handled it admirably. The fleeting images seen at dawn were being dismissed as holographic advertising glitches. "They want it to be a spectacle," Alexis said, his voice quiet. "Something to be consumed, analyzed briefly, and then discarded for the next sensation." He watched the lights of the city, the movement of air traffic high above, the oblivious rhythm of life continuing. "Did it matter, Eve? Did any of it? We struck at the heart of his empire, disabled the TX, showed them something real, and they're already turning it back into noise." He leaned against the cold synth steel railing, the weariness seeping into his bones. His journey had brought him here, from the sterile heights of academia and guilt to the grimy depths of rebellion and sacrifice. He had faced the monster he helped create, seen its true horror, and struck it down. But the city, the people, their moral compass seemed to spin wildly, susceptible to the strongest signal, the most entertaining distraction. "It mattered, Alexis," Eve said, stepping closer. She didn't offer platitudes, just quiet conviction. "Maybe not for everyone, not right away. Lysander built his empire on feeding their worst impulses, on turning pain into pleasure, reality into performance. You broke that machine. You showed them that the Emperor has no clothes, even if he's still trying to stitch them back on with lies." She gestured to the city, then back into the shadows of the underlevels. "The echoes, we fight for the forgotten voices. The TX silenced those voices, turned their final moments into currency. You gave us the tool to amplify them, even if it was just for a moment. And in the underlevels, down here, people saw it. They saw the denial, too. They know something happened. That spark is enough." Alexis looked at her, seeing not just the brilliant hacker and fierce rebel, but the person who had pulled him from his self-imposed exile and shown him a purpose beyond his guilt. They were allies forged in fire and shadow, bound by the secrets they kept and the truths they fought for. "My intention," he murmured, the old pain still present, but dulled by the sharp edges of recent loss and the clarity of action. "It was meant to heal, to understand." He turned it into this obscenity. "And you took it back," Eve finished for him. "You reclaimed its soul, even if the system itself is now dead. Its legacy isn't just the horror Lysander created. It's also the fight against it. It's us." He looked back at the city, at the screens that were beginning to return to their endless cycle of news, entertainment, and advertising. The brief, horrifying echoes of raw death were already being buried under a new wave of spectacle. Lysander was still out there, Lysander Corp still stood, and the fundamental human capacity for both cruelty and apathy remained. The fight was far from over. It wouldn't end with one man's downfall or one technology's destruction. It was a struggle for the soul of the city, for the collective moral compass. But for the first time in a long time, Alexis felt not just the weight of responsibility, but a sense of quiet, determined purpose. They had struck a blow. The echoes of dawn, of truth and sacrifice, might be faint, but they were out there, resonating in the artificial light, waiting for ears willing to hear. The war for Neo-Babylon's soul continued, and Alexis Thorne, the creator turned rebel, was now a soldier in its long, uncertain fight.